Chapter 1911. Xian Zongfeng looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression as if he was thinking about something. Sir Master Wu, I did kill Yang Lin. Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng, took a step forward, and said with a smile, but Yang Lin was seriously injured by Miss Lian Wui before we fought. I just got lucky, so you don't have to be so surprised, Sword Master Wu. Xian Zongfeng frowned and his expression changed. He smiled and said, You're too humble. Wui is my disciple, and I know very well what kind of person she is. She won't kill anyone, so even if she injured Yang Lin, it might not be a serious injury. You killed Yang Lin with your own ability, so there's no need to hide anything. Nie Tian's eyes froze. He didn't expect Xian Zongfeng to know Lian Wui so well. Nie Tian didn't know what to say since Xian Zongfeng was so direct. Brother Guiwu, did this young man come with you? Xian Zongfeng smiled and asked Guiwu Kwangsha. Yes. Guiwu Kwangsha nodded and said, His name is Nie Tian. He's my friend. Nie Tian. Xian Zongfeng murmured and glanced at Nie Tian. He said directly, My friend, Nie Tian, are you interested in joining the Shenwu Sword Pagoda? The calm voice caused everyone present to be stunned. Their faces immediately stiffened. Xian Zongfeng's direct invitation to Nie Tian to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was unexpected. The Shenwu Sword Pagoda was a top force in the 9 territories. Almost all swordsmen wanted to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Xian Zongfeng's direct invitation to Nie Tian was full of sincerity. Nie Tian was also surprised. He then smiled and said, Sword Master Wu, I didn't come to Evil Wind Island to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. I appreciate your kindness. Appreciate? As soon as Nie Tian finished his words, everyone screamed and stared at him in disbelief. They did not expect him to reject Xian Zongfeng's invitation. The Divine Martial Sword Pagoda was the dream of every swordsman. Now that the Divine Martial Sword Master had personally invited Nie Tian, how could they not be shocked? Nie Tian rejected the invitation on the spot. Xian Zongfeng did not expect this, and his expression changed. Lord Sword Master Wu, Nie Tian is a straightforward person. If he has offended you, please forgive him. Guiwu Kwangsha saw that Xian Zongfeng's expression was not right, so he quickly stepped forward and said, There's nothing wrong with young people being arrogant. Xian Zongfeng forced a smile, but his face did not look good. He suddenly thought of something and said, Nie Tian, you said that you didn't come to Evil Wind Island to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. What's your purpose then? Nie Tian smiled. He said that on purpose so that Xian Zongfeng would take the initiative to ask him. Nie Tian nodded and looked at Xian Zongfeng calmly. Lord Sword Master Wu, to be honest, I came to Evil Wind Island to ask for a favor. What is it? Xian Zongfeng was stunned, and his expression became even more embarrassed. Nie Tian first rejected his invitation and now said that he had a favor to ask. This made him very unhappy. The crowd was shocked. They were all curious about why Nie Tian came to Evil Wind Island. Nie Tian had just rejected Xian Zongfeng's invitation, which made everyone even more curious about his purpose. Lord Sword Master Wu, I would like to invite the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to hold the Evil Edge Sword competition in advance. Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and said, What did you say? The calm voice caused Xian Zongfeng to gasp in shock. His expression was stunned, as if he was suspecting that he had heard wrongly. Nie Tian's words also caused a commotion in the crowd. F***CK. Did I hear it wrong? This brat wants the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to hold the Evil Edge Sword competition in advance. Is this silver-haired brat crazy? The Evil Edge Sword competition is held every 30,000 years, and it has been like this for 1,000,000 years. Who does this brat think he is? He wants the competition to be brought forward. Is he sure he's not here to be a joke? The Evil Edge Sword competition is a rule that hasn't changed in 1,000,000 years. This brat first rejected Lord Sword Master Wu's invitation. Then he wants the competition to be brought forward. This is a challenge to the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. This brat has guts. Looks like he hasn't learned anything from the 3 devils of the North Sea. The crowd discussed, and they all thought that Nie Tian was crazy. How could the rules of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda be changed so easily? Even if it was Guiwu Kwangsha who said this, he would be mocked, let alone Yetian. Lord Sword Master Wu, I said, I want to ask the Shinwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the Evil Edge sword competition. However, Yetian completely ignored the crowd's discussion. Instead, he smiled faintly and repeated what he had just said in a very calm manner. Xian Zongfeng's face darkened and his eyes were filled with anger. He confirmed that he didn't hear it wrong and said, Brat, you are challenging the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. Challenging the Shinwu Sword Pagoda in front of the Sword Master was definitely a crazy thing to do. Xian Zongfeng's face was dark, and he suppressed the anger in his eyes. There was even a hint of murderous intent in them. However, he didn't make a move right away. He was restraining himself. Master, don't be angry. You just saved me and Zhuobu Fan. Lien Wui noticed Xian Zongfeng's anger and stepped forward to plead for Yetian. Lord Sword Master Wu, I have no intention of challenging the Shinwu Sword Pagoda, but Yetian frowned and was interrupted by Xian Zongfeng. Brother Guiwu. Xian Zongfeng growled and looked at Guiwu Quangsha. You used to be a member of the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. You should know what the Evil Edge Sword Contest means to the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. For your sake, I will pretend that I didn't hear what he said. Now, please take him away. The Shinwu Sword Pagoda doesn't welcome you. Guiwu Quangsha's face froze, and he didn't know what to say. He came with Yetian, and his status and strength were far above Yetian. Xian Zongfeng obviously thought that he was the leader of this matter and not Yetian. Xian Zongfeng letting Guiwu Quangsha leave with Yetian was already the biggest concession he could make. Compared to dealing with the three devils of the North Sea, Xian Zongfeng was much gentler. Lord Sword Master Wu, this has nothing to do with Lord Guiwu. He just came with me to Evil Edge Island. At this moment, Yetian took a step forward and said calmly, I came to Evil Edge Island for the Evil Edge sword duel. I won't leave before it's done. His voice was as calm as water, but it was filled with violent contradictions. Everyone's eyes were focused on Yetian. No one thought that he would dare to say such a thing under such circumstances. Chapter 19:12. With these words, Xian Zongfeng stared at Yetian with a gloomy face, his eyes filled with killing intent. Letting Guiwu Sha take Yetian away was already the biggest concession he could make. However, Yetian didn't know what was good for him and forced him to kill. Guiwu Sha sensed Xian Zongfeng's murderous intent and became nervous. What he was most worried about had happened. Xian Zongfeng dared to kill the three devils of the North Sea. So why would he show mercy to Yetian? Guiwu Quangsha couldn't figure out why Yetian would mention the Evil Edge sword competition in front of so many people. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, Xian Zongfeng naturally had to protect the dignity of the divine martial sword pagoda. The atmosphere at the scene suddenly fell into a suffocating depression. Everyone's eyes were locked on Yetian, waiting to see how he would react. If Yetian said the wrong thing, Xian Zongfeng would kill him without hesitation. Sir Master Wu, I would like to ask you a question. How long has it been since the Shinwu Sword Pagoda had a legendary swordsman? Yetian's reaction was very calm as he asked with a smile. Xian Zongfeng's face darkened again as he shouted, Kid, are you mocking the Shinwu Sword Pagoda? In the Shinwu Sword Pagoda, there hadn't been a legendary swordsman since the first Swordmaster. Everyone in the 9 domains knew about this. Yetian's sudden mention of this matter was clearly a provocation. In fact, it wasn't just the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. Even the entire 9 domains hadn't had a legendary swordsman in a long time. Disher Tian might be the only swordsman in the 9 domains who had reached the legendary state of sword and martial arts. That was why Guiwu Sha was so shocked when he saw Disher Tian. I'm just a swordsman of the essence of the sword. How would I dare to mock the Shinwu Sword Pagoda? Yetian smiled and said, Sir Master Wu, if I'm not wrong, your sword cultivation should be at the pinnacle of the realm of sword and martial arts as one. You're only one step away from the legendary state, right? Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a moment. His face darkened as he said, Boy, what are you trying to say? Sword Lord Wu, I have a swordsman with me. I believe that if it's just sword intent, you're no match for him. Yetian smiled and continued. Impossible. Xian Zongfeng growled and stared at Nietan. No swordsman in the 9 domains has reached the legendary realm of sword and martial unity. The person you're talking about does not exist. Xian Zongfeng's sword Dao cultivation was indeed at the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. In terms of combat power, there were indeed a few people in the 9 realms who were above him, such as Sacred Leader, 9 Deities Calamity, Wind and Cloud Alliance Master Niedao, and others. However, in terms of sword Dao strength, there was almost no one who could defeat Xian Zongfeng in terms of sword intent. At least, Xian Zongfeng believed that his sword intent was already at the peak of the 9 realms. Only the other sword master of the divine, martial sword pagoda, could rival him. He did not care about the other swordsmen. Now, then yet Tian suddenly said that he could find someone who could defeat him in terms of sword intent. How could he believe it? Unless the swordsman's sword Dao cultivation had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Xian Zongfeng noticed that there was only one expert beside Nietan, Guiwu Kuangsha. He did not care about the others at all. What if he exists and is right here? Tian smiled as a strange light flashed in his eyes. Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a moment. Then he glanced at everyone present, including Sakura, but he did not feel anything unusual. Finally, he looked at Tian and his face turned cold. His sword momentum suddenly surged, and he said coldly, "Brat, are you kidding me?" Boom! In the blink of an eye, Xian Zongfeng released a terrifying sword momentum. Suddenly, a terrifying sword will spread out. Everyone felt the terrifying pressure, and their expressions changed. Their eyes trembled. Tian was the first to feel Xian Zongfeng's sword intent. His expression changed, and he said in horror, "What a powerful pressure!" Xian Zongfeng was still calm. It was obvious that he only wanted to give Tian a warning and did not fully release the pressure. Otherwise, Tian would not be able to withstand it. Tian, it's time for you to show up. Tian tried his best to hold on and said to Tian. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Sakura's mouth. He was a smart person, so he naturally knew how to cooperate with Tian. The divine martial sword pagoda's sword master is a mediocre person with no knowledge, Tian said as he stepped forward. The dull voice fell, but it was like a clap of thunder from the 9th heaven, causing everyone to be stunned for a moment, their eyes trembling as they looked at Sakura. When everyone saw the face of the person who spoke, their expressions froze, and they couldn't help but snicker. No one thought that the person who spoke would be a 7-year-old child. However, there were also people who were horrified. They could tell that Tian was the child who blocked Yang Sen's sword for Tian. "Little kid, are you mocking me?" Xian Zongfeng was taken aback, but he saw Tian's face and couldn't do anything. He could only speak in a cold tone. As the divine martial sword master, it would be too degrading for him to attack a 7-year-old child in public. It's this little brother. At this time, Lien Wui was startled and immediately recognized Tian. She couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. "Wui, do you know him?" Xian Zongfeng looked at Lien Wui. Lien Wui nodded and said, "Teacher, he blocked Yang Sen's sword just now." Xian Zongfeng was stunned, his eyes filled with horror. Yang Sen was one of the North Sea's 3 beasts. Although he wasn't a peak powerhouse, he wasn't someone ordinary people could block. If the person in front of him was a young man, Xian Zongfeng wouldn't be surprised at all because he had seen too many geniuses. However, Tian was only 6 or 7 years old. His bone age wouldn't lie. A 7-year-old child fighting against the North Sea's 3 beasts was too shocking. You're the swordsman that Tian talked about?" Xian Zongfeng was stunned. He suddenly thought of something and asked in horror. "Yes." Tian nodded and said, "My sword intent is definitely above yours." Everyone was stunned once again as they looked at Sakura in astonishment, their expressions astonished to the extreme. They didn't feel any sword intent fluctuation from Tian. It was very strange. Tian was a swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts. He could release and retract his sword intent freely. If he deliberately hid his sword intent, others wouldn't be able to see it. Because of this, everyone ignored his existence. At this moment, Di Tian directly said that his sword intent was above Xian Zongfeng's. One could imagine how shocked everyone was. Xian Zongfeng looked at Di Tian with a complicated expression and didn't speak for a long time. He didn't feel any sword intent fluctuation from Di Tian. This was what surprised him the most. Chapter 19:13. Xian Zongfeng was unable to see through Di Tian, and his expression became complicated, revealing a trace of fear. Seeing Xian Zongfeng's reaction, Di Tian's gem-like eyes flickered and said, "Do you dare to compete with me in sword intent?" After he finished speaking, Di Tian released a wave of sword intent. The sword intent soared into the sky, and a faint pressure spread in the space, giving people a feeling of boundless might. Everyone's expression changed, and their faces became incomparably shocked. Sakura Heaven's sword intent seemed weak, but made people feel that it was boundless and mysterious, so much so that it made people have the urge to prostrate and worship it. This is really... Xian Zongfeng felt the sword intent in the void, and his face became dumbfounded. He was so excited that he couldn't say anything. He was very sure that this was the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Guiwu Quangsha's face also became sluggish, and he didn't react for a long time. Nie Tian looked at everyone's exaggerated reaction, and the corner of his mouth slightly smiled. This was the effect he wanted, to let Di Tian amaze the audience. After a while, when everyone's expression slightly recovered, Nie Tian took a step forward, looked at Xian Zongfeng, and said, "Sword Lord Wu, now you should believe what I said just now." Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled, and he nodded. His eyes flashed with unconcealable passion, and then he looked at Di Tian and said, "Lord, I want to compete with you in sword intent." Nie Tian was stunned, and he suspected that he had heard wrongly. Xian Zongfeng clearly knew that Di Tian was a swordsman of the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Why did he still want to compete with him in sword intent? Wasn't this looking for abuse? However, Nie Tian immediately understood that Xian Zongfeng was unwilling to give up the opportunity to compete with the legendary swordsman of the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. Sure. Di Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and said lightly. Nie Tian nodded slightly, not worried at all. Since Xian Zongfeng said that it was only a competition of sword intent, then of course he couldn't use martial arts strength. He was a dignified sword lord, and he certainly wouldn't do something that went against his words. "Make your move." Di Tian took a step forward. Although his face was young, he had the demeanor of a master. Xian Zongfeng nodded, his eyes blazing. This was the first time he had fought against a legendary swordsman. Even though he knew that he was no match for him, this experience would still be very beneficial for his future advancement in swordsmanship. It was precisely because of this that Xian Zongfeng took the initiative to compete with Sakura in sword intent. "Sir, be careful," Xian Zongfeng shouted, and a 3-foot sword appeared in his hand. He thrust it forward, and the sword intent whistled as it attacked towards Di Tian. The corners of Sakura's mouth curled up slightly. His face was calm and tranquil. In the next moment, the heaven-slaughtering sword was unsheathed, and a streak of sword intent shot out like wind and lightning. Bang! The two sword shadows collided in the air. A muffled sound rang out, and one of the sword shadows shattered. Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled when he saw a sword shadow coming towards him. He quickly took a few steps back, but he was still too slow. A glaring wound was left on his arm. So fast, everyone's eyes trembled as they cried out in surprise. Most of the people present were swordsmen. Of course, they could see how terrifying Sakura's sword intent was. No wonder he's a swordsman at the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unite. He's really powerful. Guiwu Quangsha's eyes flickered as he was surprised. He finally understood why Nie Tian was so confident that he could persuade the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the evil edge sword duel. It turned out that he had Sakura as his trump card. A swordsman at the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unite was enough to change the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's mind. Again, although Xian Zongfeng was injured, he looked very excited. He roared and thrust his sword again. Sakura did not even look at him and thrust his sword forward. A muffled sound rang in the air, and Xian Zongfeng's figure took a few steps back. In the blink of an eye, after dozens of strikes, there were dozens of wounds on Xian Zongfeng's body. His body was dripping with blood, but his eyes were very excited. During the fight with Sakura, Xian Zongfeng had some enlightenment, which made him very excited. Everyone was shocked to see the scene in the sky. A 7-year-old child had made the dignified Shenwu sword master covered in blood. How could such a scene not be shocking? After a while, the sword duel between Sakura and Xian Zongfeng ended. The result was self-evident. Sakura completely crushed Xian Zongfeng. Although it was only a small realm difference, the legendary realm of sword and martial arts unite was completely beyond the pinnacle of sword and martial arts unite. Thank you for your guidance. Xian Zongfeng put away his 3-foot hidden-edged sword and bowed respectfully. Sakura did not say anything. He only nodded and looked at Tian. Tian smiled faintly and opened 9 extremities to let Sakura enter. Everyone was shocked to see Sakura's figure disappear from Tian's side. They were all wondering what the relationship between Tian and Sakura was. Sword Master Wu, can we talk about the Evil Peak sword duel now? Tian ignored everyone's reaction and turned to look at Xian Zongfeng. Tian, let's talk inside the city, Xian Zongfeng said with a slight change of expression. Then, under Xian Zongfeng's lead, Tian and the others entered the Shenwu city and went straight to the main hall. Brother Gu, Tian, please take a seat. Xian Zongfeng gestured for Guiwu Guangsha and the others to sit, but his expression was not good. The Evil Peak sword duel was very important. After all, it was a rule of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda that could not be broken. Sword Master Wu, is the Evil Peak sword duel a problem? Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and asked. Xian Zongfeng nodded and said, the Evil Peak sword duel is held once every 30,000 years. It has not changed for the past 1,000,000 years. There are still a few thousand years until the next Evil Peak sword duel. If it is held earlier, I'm afraid it will damage the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's reputation. Tian frowned slightly. Xian Zongfeng was very concerned about the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's reputation. Perhaps he did not have any selfish motives when he dealt with the 3 devils of the North Sea. He was just trying to protect the Shenwu Sword Pagoda's reputation. Guiwu Guangsha had said before that the 2 sword masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda were famous for being stubborn. Now that he saw it, it was indeed true. Sword Master Wu, can't you make an exception for once? Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and asked in a deep voice. Xian Zongfeng frowned and said, this is not something I can decide alone. Please stay in the Shenwu city for a few days. I will discuss it with the Divine Sword Master after he finishes his closed-door training. Closed-door training? Tian was stunned. No wonder he had not seen the Divine Sword Master. The latter was in closed-door training. Tian knew that these experts could easily stay in closed-door training for hundreds or even thousands of years. If the Divine Sword Master was in closed-door training for a few hundred years, he would not have that much time to wait. Xian Zongfeng knew what Tian was thinking and said with a faint smile, don't worry, the Master of the Divine Sword will come out of seclusion soon. Chapter 1914. The matter of the Evil Peak sword discourse was not something that Xian Zongfeng could decide alone. The 2 sword masters had to discuss it together. The other sword master was currently in closed-door training and would only come out after a few days. Tian and the others decided to stay in the governor's mansion for a few days while waiting for the sword master to come out. Brother Wu, I will arrange your accommodations. Xian Zongfeng smiled faintly, looking very peaceful. It was like a different person from when he was trying to kill the North Sea's 3 evils. Tian felt strange about the change in Xian Zongfeng's attitude, but he did not take it to heart. After a while, Tian and the others were led by a guard to a small courtyard in the governor's mansion. Tian, we will stay here for the time being, Guiwu Guangsha said, and turned to walk into the courtyard. Jian Jingyun and Guiwu can followed him. Tian nodded slightly, and was ready to enter the courtyard. But at this moment, he felt someone coming from behind him. "It's her!" Nyetian turned around and saw an unexpected face. He could not help but be stunned and said in his heart, "What is she doing here?" The person who appeared in front of Nyetian made him a little surprised. It turned out to be Lien Wui. Nyetian felt strange. What was Lien Wui doing here? Miss Lien. Since he had already found Lien Wui, Nyetian could only greet her. Are you called Nyetian?" Lien Wui walked over and asked with a slightly embarrassed face. "Miss Lien, is there anything I can help you with?" Nyetian nodded and smiled. He did not want to waste time on Lien Wui and asked directly. Nyetian's straightforwardness made Lien Wui blush. She seemed to feel wronged. Then she suddenly thought of something and said, "You saved me just now. I haven't thanked you yet." "You're welcome. Didn't you plead for me in front of Sword Master Wu?" Nyetian laughed. Seeing Lien Wui's embarrassment, he did not want to be too cold. At this time, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan hadn't gone far. When they saw Lien Wui, they stopped in their tracks. "Nyetian, this is your first time in Divine Martial City, right? How about I take you to the sword grounds?" Lien Wui's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Sword Field? What is this place?" Nyetian was slightly stunned and couldn't help but ask. Lien Wui was much more relaxed. She giggled and said, "The sword field is where we usually train our swords. There are many sword formations there that are very helpful for our sword Dao cultivation. Let's go and take a look." Nyetian couldn't help but be stunned. The dance costume was too enthusiastic, which made him feel uncomfortable. After thinking for a while, Nyetian turned around and said to Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan, "Brother Jian, Brother Gue Wuchan, let's go to the sword arena together." Okay. Gue Wuchan gave a mischievous smile as he hurriedly agreed. Jian Jingyun was slightly embarrassed, but he still walked over. Lien Wui didn't think much of it. Instead, she was very happy. Under Lien Wui's lead, Nyetian and the others left the city lord's mansion and headed towards the sword arena. On the way, Lien Wui kept glancing at Nyetian intentionally or unintentionally, which made him feel very uncomfortable. "Miss Lien, if you have something to say, there is no harm in saying it." Nyetian finally couldn't bear it anymore and directly said. Lien Wui's small face slightly stiffened, and she immediately blushed. She walked over bashfully and finally mustered up her courage to say, "Nyetian, actually, I have something to ask of you." "What is it?" Nyetian was stunned. He didn't expect Lien Wui to really have something to ask of him. "Miss Lien, don't tell me you have taken a fancy to Nyetian?" Gue Wuchan blabbered without thinking and directly let out a strange cry. "Of course not." Lien Wui's charming face blushed all the way to her ears. She quickly denied and said, "I just want to see that little brother." "Little brother?" Nyetian stared blankly for a moment and immediately reacted. Lien Wui wanted to see Tian. Suddenly understanding, Nyetian couldn't help but let out a long sigh in his heart. Just now, he really thought that Lien Wui had feelings for him, but now it seemed that he was thinking too much. The one that Lien Wui was truly interested in was not Nyetian, but Tian. In fact, it was no wonder. After seeing Tian and Xian Zongfeng's sword intent competition, who wouldn't be interested in Tian? Not to mention Lien Wui, perhaps Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchan also wanted to see Tian, but the two just didn't say it. "I beg you, let that little brother come out to see me." Lien Wui looked at Nyetian with pleading eyes, her pair of beautiful eyes flashing nonstop. Nyetian was helpless and could only say, "I can let Tian come out. As for whether he wants to see you or not, it will depend on your own ability." Good. Quickly let him come out." Lien Wui saw that Nyetian agreed and quickly nodded in excitement. Nyetian smiled bitterly. He knew that Tian liked peace and didn't want to have too much contact with other people. Nyetian opened 9 Extreme, and Tian's figure appeared. However, he only glanced at Nyetian and completely ignored the other people and said, "Nyetian, what's the matter?" Although Tian looked like he was carved out of jade, like a porcelain doll, The aura of his whole body was very ice-cold, giving people an enormous pressure. Of course, Nyetian wasn't afraid of Di Shirtion. He faintly smiled and explained the situation in front of him. Di Shirtion listened and frowned. He raised his head and glanced at Lien Wui, then said, "Little girl, you have already seen me. Is there anything else?" This. Lien Wui's pretty face stiffened. She had a wronged expression, but she couldn't say anything. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuxian saw that Di Shirtion was so cold towards a super evildoer like Lien Wui, so they immediately dispelled the idea of asking Di Shirtion for advice on Sword Dao. "Since there's nothing else, I will go back." Di Shirtion's face was cold. He glanced at Nyetian and prepared to return to 9 Extreme. "Wait!" Lien Wui became anxious and directly called out, "Little brother, can you play with me for a few days?" As soon as Lien Wui said this, the faces of Nyetian and the others changed and froze. Who would have thought that Lien Wui would actually say such words? Did she treat Di Shirtion as a toy and play with her for a few days? Di Shirtion was a swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. He might be the only swordsman in the 9 domains to reach this realm. How could such a person be a match for you to play with? "Nyetian, I'm going back." Di Shirtion's face was cold, but wasn't good for him to flare up. Nyetian's face couldn't help but be a little embarrassed. In fact, it was quite stressful for him to be with Di Shirtion. Only Fat Cat could easily deal with Di Shirtion. "Miss Lien, I am sorry. His temper is like this." Nyetian smiled helplessly. He then prepared to open 9 Extreme and let Di Shirtion go back. However, at this moment, a familiar voice rang out. Chapter 19:15. The sudden appearance of Fat Cat made the scene instantly fall into an awkward situation. Nyetian looked at Fat Cat with a stiff face and couldn't speak for a long time. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuxian had a strange expression as they looked at Fat Cat in confusion. This was the first time Lien Wui saw Fat Cat, so her expression was even more exaggerated. Her small mouth opened wide, but she couldn't make a sound for a long time. "Boss Chinchilla." Indra looked at Fat Cat with an embarrassed face and didn't know what to say next. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. Fat Cat actually asked him to accompany Lien Wui to play. Nyetian reacted and looked at Fat Cat with a puzzled face. He didn't understand why the latter would make such a decision. "Little girl, don't worry. In the next few days, Indra will be with you. This sovereign will let him guide you well." Fat Cat completely ignored the reaction of Nyetian and the others and said to Lien Wui with a proud face, "Really?" Lien Wui cried out in surprise, and her pretty face was brimming with unconcealable joy. But she didn't believe it and worried that Fat Cat's words were useless. After all, it was just a cat. Could it make a decision for Indra? Lien Wui didn't know the relationship between Fat Cat and Indra at all, so she doubted Fat Cat's prestige. Nyetian, Fat Cat, Indra, the relationship between the three was a bit subtle. It was like rock, paper, scissors, balancing and restraining each other. Indra could ignore Nyetian's words, but he didn't dare to disobey Fat Cat. "Of course it's true." Fat Cat smiled faintly, then looked at Indra and said, "Indra, you don't have any objections, right?" Indra had a helpless expression and finally nodded. "Little brother, you really agreed?" Lien Wui was surprised and suddenly felt that happiness came too suddenly. "Di Shirtion, for the next period of time, you should stay with this little girl." Fat Cat chuckled and said, "She is an evildoer of the Sword Dao. You have to guide her well." "Yes." Sakura nodded helplessly with a look of reluctance. It wasn't that he thought the dance clothes were bad, but he had been alone for too long, and he really didn't want to be with others. "So you are called Di Shirtion." Lien Wui, on the other hand, was very happy. She took a step forward to Di Shirtion's side and said, "From now on, I'll call you little brother Shirtion. You can just call me Big Sister Wui." Sakura raised his head and glanced at Lien Wui. His big eyes flickered, and he looked like he wanted to cry, but had no tears. Nyetian smiled bitterly. Only Fat Cat could make Sakura do this. Following that, the crowd continued to move forward and soon arrived at the sword field. This is the sword field. Lien Wui was very excited, and she said to Sakura, little brother Sakura, let's go take a look at the sword formation. After saying that, Lien Wui pulled Sakura to the sword field, and Sakura was completely dragged over. Tian couldn't help but shake his head and smile when he saw this scene. This sword field looks very good. Gue Wukong looked at the sword field and said with a proud face. Tian looked over. The entire sword field was very wide, with a radius of a few dozen miles. There were many arenas on the ground, and many swordsmen were fighting in pairs. High up in the sky, there were many floating sword formations. The sword intent was very strong, and it was very helpful for swordsmen to comprehend the sword Tao. Jian Jingyan, let's go take a look. Gue Wukong chuckled and said to Jian Jingyan. Jian Jingyan nodded, and the two of them entered the sword field. Tian looked at the back of the two people, and he just smiled, but he didn't move. Fat, why do you want Sakura to accompany Lien Wui? Seeing that there was no one around, Tian finally couldn't help but ask the question in his heart. Tian wasn't a fool. Of course, he could see that Fat Cat definitely had a purpose for letting Sakura accompany Lien Wui. At this moment, Fat Cat's expression was somewhat serious. She suddenly looked at Tian and asked, Tian, what do you think of Lien Wui's talent in the sword Tao? Terrifying. Tian thought for a moment and spat out two words. Lien Wui's talent in the sword Tao could only be described with one word, terrifying. Among all the swordsmen that Tian had met, only Cher's talent could surpass Lien Wui's. Tian, do you know that there's a reason why this little girl's talent is so terrifying? Fat Cat said in a deep voice, and her expression was somewhat solemn. What do you mean? Tian was stunned for a moment. He didn't understand what Fat Cat was saying. Fat Cat's gaze trembled slightly. She first sensed for a moment to make sure that there was no one around before she said, Tian, if I'm not wrong, someone planted a blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body. Blood-weeping sword infant. Hearing this strange name, Tian couldn't help but frown and was stunned for a moment. He had never heard of something like a blood-weeping sword infant. Fat Cat's expression was very ugly. After hesitating for a long time, she finally said, blood-weeping sword infant is a kind of evil technique to cultivate sword intent. Cultivate sword intent? Tian was stunned, and his expression was incomparably shocked. He only knew that spiritual materials could be cultivated, but he had never heard that sword intent could be cultivated as well. Sword intent wasn't a living thing, so how could it be cultivated? Fat Cat hesitated again and said, sword intent is a non-living thing, so it can't be cultivated. However, the blood-weeping sword infant is a very strange, evil technique. This kind of evil technique first plants a blood-weeping sword infant seed in a martial artist's body. Then, the blood-weeping sword infant will continuously absorb the sword intent in the swordsman's body and become stronger and stronger. Moreover, as the blood-weeping sword infant becomes stronger, it also causes the swordsman's sword intent to become stronger. In this way, the blood-weeping sword infant and the swordsman it resides in will form a very strange symbiotic relationship. The two will promote each other, fuse with each other, and become stronger together. Tian was stunned on the spot. The things Fat Cat said were too strange and shocked him. After a moment, Tian calmed down a little and said, Fat, according to what you said, the blood-weeping sword infant doesn't have any disadvantages. Why is an evil technique? It was a good thing that the blood-weeping sword infant and the swordsman became stronger together. Although the method was a little evil, it didn't have any disadvantages for the swordsman. Fat Cat shook her head and said, although the blood-weeping sword infant and the swordsman become stronger together, the blood-weeping sword infant itself doesn't belong to the swordsman. The blood-weeping sword infant is usually used as a method to plunder sword intent. Plunder sword intent? Tian was stunned again and didn't quite understand. Fat Cat's eyes trembled slightly, and she said in a deep voice, let me tell you directly. Someone planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body. Their purpose is to wait until the blood-weeping sword infant matures so that they can plunder Lien Wui's sword intent. Nye Tian frowned, and his face instantly sank. He finally understood. Although the blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body helped her become stronger, it was also absorbing her sword intent at the same time. When the blood-weeping sword infant matured, someone would take the blood-weeping sword infant from Lien Wui's body and take it for themselves. After understanding all this, Nye Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he sucked in a breath of cold air, using the blood-weeping sword infant to plunder other people's sword intent. This method was really cruel. At this moment, Nye Tian suddenly thought a question, and he exclaimed, "Who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body?" Chapter 1916. Fat Cat looked at Nye Tian with a strange expression, which made the latter nervous. Lien Wui's body had been implanted with a blood-weeping sword infant. Who was the one who had implanted the blood-weeping sword infant? Nye Tian's mind raced. Soon, a name appeared in his mind, and he almost blurted it out. Profound Hidden Peak. You have a suspect in mind, but don't say it. Fat Cat smiled, and guess what Nye Tian was thinking? It said, the sooner the blood-weeping sword soul is planted, the better. I speculate that the blood-weeping sword soul was planted when she was still a baby. You can ask Lien Wui about her background later, and see when she came to the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Okay. Nye Tian nodded with anger in his eyes. Xian Zongfeng was Lien Wui's teacher. If he really planted the blood-weeping sword soul, then this teacher was worse than a pig or a dog. Nye Tian's eyes flickered, and he asked, "Little fatty, it's because Lien Wui has the blood-weeping sword infant inside her that you let Sakura follow her, right?" Fat Cat's expression changed slightly. It said, "I felt that the blood-weeping sword soul in Lien Wui's body is unstable, so I let Sakura follow her and give her some pointers to see if he can stabilize the blood-weeping sword soul." The blood-weeping sword soul is unstable? Nye Tian was startled and asked, "Why is that?" Fat Cat sighed and said, "I'm afraid that the person who planted the blood-weeping sword soul couldn't wait any longer and wanted to take the blood-weeping sword soul out of Lien Wui's body in advance." Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He asked, "If the blood-weeping sword soul is taken out, what will happen to Lien Wui?" "She will die." Little Fat Cat's expression was solemn as it said, "The blood-weeping sword infant and the host are in a symbiotic relationship, sharing glory and destruction. If the blood-weeping sword infant is taken out, the host will die without a doubt." When Nye Tian heard Fat Cat's words, his face darkened and became extremely cold. The blood-weeping sword infant was indeed an evil technique. Not only did it steal one's sword intent, it also harmed one's life. The blood-weeping sword infant will only grow faster in the hands of those with outstanding talent. Therefore, the more talented one is in the way of the sword, the easier it is to be targeted. Fat Cat sighed and said, "Lien Wui is a sword Dao monster, even without the blood-weeping sword infant. Her sword Dao talent is far above Jian Jingyun and the others. It's not strange that she would be targeted and become the host of the blood-weeping sword infant." He had a feeling that the person who had planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui was most likely a member of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, and Xian Zongfeng, the master of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, was the prime suspect. However, Nye Tian did not dare to conclude that Xian Zongfeng was the one who planted the Crimson Blood Sword infant in Lien Wui's body. Everything needed to be verified before it could be confirmed. Lien Wui definitely did not know that there was a Crimson Blood Sword infant in her body, and neither did the others. Even Sakura couldn't sense the Crimson Blood Sword infant, let alone the others. Only a monster like Fat Cat would know about the Crimson Blood Sword infant. Nye Tian sighed and regained his composure. He was ready to go to the sword field and experience the sword formation of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. His figure flashed, and he stepped into the sword grounds. However, at this moment, Nye Tian suddenly felt someone behind him. He turned around and saw a familiar person, Liang Chao. When Nye Tian and the others first entered the Shenwu city, they had some conflicts with Liang Chao. "Brad, it's you." Liang Chao's eyes flickered when he saw Nye Tian clearly. His expression turned cold, and he said, "I didn't expect you to dare come to the Shenwu city." Nie Tian once forced Liang Chao to apologize, and the latter's hatred for him was greater than the sky and deeper than the sea. Liang Chao never expected to meet Nie Tian in the sword field of the Shenwu city. To him, this was a heaven-sent opportunity for revenge. The Shenwu city doesn't belong to you. Why can't I come? Nie Tian looked at Liang Chao and smiled provocatively. He then looked at the person behind Liang Chao. A black-clothed swordsman stood behind Liang Chao. He was burly, had a cold expression, and his aura was powerful. What an arrogant brat! Before Liang Chao could speak, the black-clothed martial artist stepped forward and stared at Nie Tian coldly. Brat, do you know who you were talking to? Is that really important? Nie Tian asked with a calm smile. Huh? The black-clothed swordsman frowned. He didn't expect Nie Tian's reaction to be so calm. Brother Wu Yin, this brat is the one who injured me in the Shenwu city. Liang Chao looked at Nie Tian with hatred. He's the one who forced me to apologize even though he knew that I have the Shenwu sword soul. Wu Yan's face darkened, and she took a step forward, unleashing terrifying sword energy that bore down on Nie Tian. At the same time, she shouted, Brat, how dare you look down on the Shenwu sword soul? You're courting death. Bam! However, Nie Tian didn't retreat. Instead of retreating, his figure flashed, and a fierce sword intent whizzed out, directly breaking the sword intent's pressure. At the same time, it forced Wu Yin to take a few steps back. You want to defeat me with your sword, aura? Aren't you looking down on me a little too much? Nie Tian smiled faintly as he stared at Wu Yin with a playful and provocative look in his eyes. Wu Yin was an early paramount god and had reached the sword oblivion level. She wasn't weak, but it was impossible for her to defeat Nie Tian with sword energy alone. How is this possible? Wu Yin steadied herself and frowned. Her expression immediately changed as she cried out in alarm. His sword energy was so powerful that even an early overgod wouldn't be able to withstand it. How could Nie Tian, who was only a late high god, break through it so easily? It was too strange. Brother Wu Yin, this brat's strength is very strange. There's a strange rune in his body that can increase his strength by an entire realm. Liang Chao had fought with Nie Tian before, so she hurriedly explained. So that's how it is. Wu Yin sneered. She then calmed down and said, Looks like I'll have to show my true strength if I want to defeat him. Nie Tian's lips curled up, and he said, I'm just afraid that you won't be my opponent even if you show your true strength. How arrogant! Wu Yin roared, and her sword energy surged. She was actually ready to attack. But at that moment, a feminine voice rang out. Stop! Lien Wui appeared and looked at Wu Yin angrily. Wu Yin, Nie Tian is an honored guest of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Do you want to fight him? Junior's sister. Wu Yin couldn't help but tremble when she saw Lien Wui. She didn't expect her to suddenly appear and speak up for Nie Tian. Lien Wui didn't hold any position in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but she had a special status. Apart from being the top genius of the pagoda, she was also the disciple of Sword Master Xianzongfeng. Therefore, everyone in the pagoda had to show her respect. Chapter 1917. What do you think you're doing, Wu Yin? Lien Wui roared anxiously when she saw that Wu Yin wasn't going to stop. Junior apprentice sister, calm down. I'm just teaching him a lesson. I promise I won't kill him. Wu Yin sneered. She then turned to Nie Tian and said, Brat, do you dare to fight me? Wu Yin clearly didn't know what Nie Tian had just done. Therefore, she didn't recognize Nie Tian at all. She only thought that Nie Tian must be taught a lesson for insulting Liang Chao and provoking the divine martial sword soul. Wu Yin, stop pestering me. You're no match for Nie Tian. Lien Wui's beautiful eyes flickered as she said agitatedly, I'm no match for him. Wu Yin stared blankly for a moment, but soon after, she cast a sideways glance at Nie Tian and sneered, Junior Marshall's sister, don't flatter others and belittle yourself. Wu Yin, I'm a dignified divine martial sword soul. Do you think I can't even defeat a high god trash? By this time, a large crowd had gathered around them. Many of them recognized Nie Tian. Their eyes trembled, and their faces wore playful smiles. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and his face sank. He took a step forward and said in a cold tone, "Did you just say that I'm trash?" "Umph." Wu Yin sneered and said, "I'm an early-stage paramount god, and I've reached the realm of sword essence. But you're just a late-stage high god. If you're not trash, then what are you?" "Wu Yin, you've crossed the line." Before Nye Tian could speak, Lien Wui's face darkened. "Have I crossed the line?" Wu Yin sneered again and said, "In my opinion, you've crossed the line by looking down on the divine martial sword soul." "You." Lien Wui still wanted to say something, but she was stopped by Nye Tian. Nye Tian's lips curled into a smile. He stared at Wu Yin and said, "Since you say that I'm trash, then let this trash have a taste of your skills. You want to fight me?" Wu Yin was stunned for a moment before a trace of joy flashed in his eyes. He originally thought that Nye Tian would hide behind Lien Wui. He didn't expect that Nye Tian would take the initiative to challenge him. Isn't he courting death? So many people are waiting to watch. How can I spoil everyone's mood? Nye Tian said with a smile as his gaze swept across the crowd. Wu Yin froze for a moment. Then, he looked at the crowd and noticed that there was something wrong with everyone's gaze. They were all looking at him with a pitiful gaze. Many of the people present had seen Nye Tian kill Yang Lin with a single strike. The latter's strength was far above Wu Yan's. Therefore, everyone believed that Wu Yin was no match for Nye Tian. Strange. Why are these people's gazes so strange? Is there something strange about this kid's strength? Wu Yin couldn't help muttering to herself when she saw everyone's gazes. Thinking back to what Lien Wui had just said, Wu Yan's heart thumped even harder. But he had already said it. It was impossible for him to go back on his words. "Go ahead." Nye Tian smiled faintly. Since Wu Yin insisted on being abused, how could he refuse? "You're just trying to be mysterious. I want to see what kind of ability you have to fight me." Wu Yin roared. He then took a step into the sky. "Nye Tian, be careful." Jian Jingyun walked to Nye Tian and whispered, "Don't worry." With a faint smile, Nye Tian blurred into action and flew high into the air to confront Wu Yin. Everyone raised their heads and fixed their eyes on Nye Tian and Wu Yin. They were ready to watch a good show. "Make your move," Nye Tian said calmly, his face expressionless. Arrogant. Nye Tian's indifference made Wu Yin feel like he was being looked down upon. He roared in anger, and a gigantic sword appeared in his hand. His entire body emitted a majestic sword intent. What a rare attribute. Interesting. Nye Tian couldn't help but smile when he sensed Wu Yan's sword intent. Wu Yan's sword intent was a variation of the earth attribute. Hence, Nye Tian judged that this person's sword intent was incomparably ferocious. "You're courting death." Wu Yin let out a low roar and slashed out with the huge, profound stone sword in her hand. Immediately, a terrifying sword intent appeared in the air and condensed into a profound stone sword shadow. Like a mountain, it crazily pressed down on Nye Tian. Nye Tian's lips curled into a smile. His astral soul wings appeared on his back. His silhouette moved like the wind and lightning, nimbly dodging Wu Yan's attack. Wu Yan's sword intent was majestic, but it wasn't agile enough. It was extremely powerful. If a cultivator of the same level were to face it head-on, they would definitely be at a disadvantage. However, its weakness was that its speed was too slow, making it difficult for him to face his opponent head-on. Against an opponent like Nye Tian, who possessed the astral soul wings, Wu Yin appeared extremely clumsy. At this moment, even if Nye Tian didn't use the 3 forbidden techniques, he could still rely on his speed to maintain an invincible position. What a fast speed! This was the first time the crowd saw Nye Tian's speed. They couldn't help but exclaim, "Damn it, die for me!" At this moment, Wu Yin slashed out with his sword again. A violent sword intent whistled through the air, but Nye Tian easily dodged it. Following that, Wu Yin continued to slash out with his sword, but all of them were dodged by Nye Tian. He couldn't cause any damage to Nye Tian at all. "Bastard, do you only know how to dodge?" Wu Yin was completely enraged. He roared madly, resembling a wild beast that had gone berserk. "Dodging is also my ability." Nye Tian smiled faintly. His mocking voice resounded in the air, appearing extremely provocative. One couldn't help but say that Wu Yan's strength had exceeded Nie Tian's expectations. If they were to face each other head-on, Nie Tian really didn't have full confidence that he could defeat Wu Yan. Damn it! Wu Yan was completely enraged. Sword intent gushed out from his body as he slashed down with his huge blackstone sword. Instantly, an endless amount of sword intent spread out, transforming into a blackstone rain that covered the sky and pressed down on Nie Tian. In order to hit Nie Tian, Wu Yan actually chose the stupidest method, which was to disperse his sword intent. Idiot! Sakura's mouth twitched when he saw this scene from below. He spoke in a cold tone. Good chance. Hovering in midair, Nie Tian's mouth curled into a smile. Terrifying black runes were released from his body, and his aura instantly soared to the extreme. Sky-piercing sword. In the next moment, Nie Tian let out a low roar and stabbed out with his starlight heavenly slash. A sword shadow whizzed out like a dragon breaking out of the abyss, rolling and roaring, directly breaking through the blackstone rain in the air. Not good. Wu Yan suddenly felt a wave of sword intent rushing towards her. She screamed in her heart and her eyes trembled. She wanted to make a move, but it was already too late. Bang! With a muffled sound, Wu Yan's figure was directly sent flying. Like a meteor, she turned into a blood-colored trail in the air and landed with a loud bang. She smashed into a martial arts arena, causing the arena to collapse, and a layer of soil rose up from the ground. Hiss! Everyone's gaze followed Wu Yan's figure as she landed on the ground. They all sucked in a breath of cold air, and their faces were filled with shock. Chapter 1918. Standing in midair, Nie Tian looked down at Wu Yan with an expressionless face and said, Wu Yan, you've lost. At this moment, Wu Yan stood up with great difficulty. Her entire body was covered in blood, and her eyes were somewhat lifeless. She said in shock, I lost. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He, a paramount god, the Shenwu sword soul of the Shenwu sword pagoda, had been defeated by someone he had called trash. But whether he believed it or not, the truth was right in front of him. He had been defeated by Nie Tian. Lien Wui walked over and looked at Wu Yan. Wu Yan, I told you long ago that you're no match for Nie Tian. You didn't listen and insisted on fighting. Now you're regretting it, aren't you? Junior sister, Wu Yan looked up at Lien Wui. His face was pale, and he couldn't speak. He had wanted to prove the strength of the Shenwu sword soul, but Nie Tian was too strange and had defeated him. The Shenwu sword soul was even more useless now. Let's go. Nie Tian's figure flickered, and he directly landed beside Jian Jingyan. There were too many people in the sword field. Staying here would only attract more people, so Nie Tian wanted to leave. Wait. However, just as Nie Tian was about to turn around, Wu Yan's voice suddenly sounded. Nie Tian suddenly turned around and stared at Wu Yan, his eyebrows furrowed. Wu Yan, do you still want to continue? Lien Wui's eyes flashed, and she said in surprise. The crowd looked at Wu Yan in confusion. They wanted to know what he was going to do. Wu Yan looked at Nie Tian hesitantly. After a while, he stepped forward and said, Nie Tian, thank you for showing mercy. The crowd was stunned. They didn't expect Wu Yan to apologize. Wu Yan wasn't a fool. How could he not tell that Nie Tian had held back just now? Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stand here and talk. You're welcome. Nie Tian was also surprised. Then he smiled and said, it's just a normal competition. There's no need to risk your life. Wu Yan's face turned red when he heard Nie Tian's words. During the battle just now, he had been thoroughly enraged by Nie Tian and couldn't wait to kill him with every swing of his sword. But Nie Tian didn't want to kill him, which made him feel ashamed. Wu Yan, Liang Chao is your subordinate, right? I hope you can keep him in check and make sure he doesn't get too arrogant. Nie Tian pondered for a moment before turning around and leaving. Wu Yan looked at Nie Tian's back with a stiff face. Then he turned to Liang Chao and shouted, Liang Chao, what is going on? Wu, brother Wu Yan. Liang Chao walked over slowly. He was terrified. His teeth were chattering. He was a completely different person from when he first entered the city. After Nie Tian and the others left the sword field, they went straight to the city lord's mansion. On the way, Tian asked about Lian Wui's background. She was an abandoned baby. Qian Zongfeng took her in as a disciple. This made Tian even more certain that the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body was planted by Qian Zongfeng. Lian Wui didn't know why Tian suddenly asked about her background. She said happily, "Teacher loves me very much. He only wants me to focus on cultivation. I've never left the Shenwu city in my life." Tian smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Qian Zongfeng treated Lian Wui as a vessel to cultivate his sword intent. Of course, he wouldn't let her leave the Shenwu city. Soon, Tian and the others returned to the city lord's mansion. Tian, Jian Jingyun, and Gue Wuchan returned to the courtyard, while Sakura left with Lian Wui. Tian returned to his room and calmed himself down. He planned to cultivate for the next few days. He could feel the signs of advancing to the peak of the high god stage. He believed that he would be able to improve his strength in a few days. Tian took out the 9 extremities and was ready to enter it to cultivate. With a thought, the 9 extremities released a space-time tunnel, and he stepped into it. Tian entered the tunnel, but his divine sense could still perceive everything outside. The 9 extremities world is really not bad. This was the first time Tian entered the 9 extremities world. Previously, he had sensed everything inside the 9 extremities world. This was the first time he entered it himself. In the 9 extremities world, it was full of flowers and vitality, and the aura of spirit power was very strong. These exotic flowers and rare herbs had all been obtained from the Holy Mother of Jiuying. Any one of them was extremely precious. Tian, let me take a good look and see how many good things there are in the 9 extremities. At this time, the figure of Fat Cat appeared. He looked around with a pair of glowing eyes and murmured. Because Fat Cat had to cultivate in the celestial demon nascent embryo, he rarely visited the 9 extremities. Tian smiled and gestured to Fat Cat to do as he pleased. Then, Tian looked at the 9 scarlet rings in the sky. They were the path of slaughter. He knew that the slaughter venerable demon was helping Rui Qinyu integrate the slaughter inheritance at this moment. Tian's divine sense couldn't enter the path of slaughter, and he didn't know what was inside. He could only wait patiently. The figure of Fat Cat quickly disappeared into the 9 extremities. Tian didn't care about him. Instead, he sat cross-legged and entered a state of cultivation. As his divine sense entered the chaotic original coffin, Tian felt the vast power of chaos in the coffin. His expression changed. This power of chaos was absorbed from the path of slaughter. Until now, Tian still didn't know what this power of chaos was for. At this time, Tian suddenly looked at the 9 extremities chaos beast. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes, and his expression became one of shock. He suddenly realized that the 9 extremities chaos beast was actually absorbing the power of chaos. This, Tian gasped. He was stunned by the scene in front of him. The 9 extremities chaos beast was absorbing the power of chaos. This was too strange. Actually, Tian had used the 9 extremities chaos beast before. At that time, he felt that the power of chaos had some effect on the 9 extremities chaos beast. However, he didn't expect that the 9 extremities chaos beast could actually directly absorb the power of chaos. Until now, Tian still didn't know what kind of power the power of chaos was. However, the previous time the 9 extremities chaos beast came out, Tian clearly felt that the power of the chaos beast was much scarier than he had expected. When he was fighting Bu Wu Qianxiu, if he didn't have the 9 extremities chaos beast, it would really be difficult for him to deal with the body of the Black Lotus. What kind of effect did the power of chaos have on the 9 extremities chaos beast? Tian frowned. He carefully felt the changes in the body of the 9 extremities chaos beast. He felt that after the 9 extremities chaos beast absorbed the power of chaos, the blood and meridians in the beast's body were obviously strengthened. The power of chaos was even changing the aura of the 9 extremities chaos beast. Tian faintly felt that inside the body of the 9 extremities chaos beast, a huge and boundless power was slowly awakening. Chapter 1919. Nietian could clearly feel that something terrible was happening inside the nine-pole chaos beast body. This made him feel uneasy and excited at the same time. At that moment, he suddenly thought of something the nine-pole chaos beast had said when it was born. His mouth twitched as he murmured, "The 9 transformations of chaos, born from nothingness." What does that mean? The 9 transformations of chaos, born from nothingness. This sentence had appeared in Nietian's spiritual consciousness when the nine-pole chaos beast had been born. Nietian could understand what it meant to be born from nothingness. Back then, the 9th-level chaos beast had been born from nothingness within the primal chaos original coffin. However, he could not understand the 9 transformations of chaos. The 9 transformations of chaos. Does the 9-pole chaos beast have to go through 9 transformations? Nietian guessed. His frown deepened. The Chaos 9 Extreme Beast had indeed gone through a lot of changes from their adorable appearance when they were born to their current image of a domineering emperor. However, these changes were very normal growth processes and could not be considered as a qualitative change. Nietian could vaguely feel that the power of chaos was causing the 9-pole chaos beast to go through a strange change. Perhaps the power of chaos was the beginning of the 9 transformations of chaos. Nietian did not know how shocked the massacring demon venerable had been when he had used the 9-pole chaos beast. According to the massacring demon venerable, the 9-pole chaos beast was a primordial spirit that should not appear in the realm. The massacring demon venerable did not understand why the 9-pole chaos beast would appear in the realm and in Nietian's body. Nietian was shocked when he felt the changes in the 9-pole chaos beast. However, he could not understand what was going on. In the end, he could only let it go. Next, Nietian began to cultivate in the chaotic original coffin. Before this, he had already felt signs of leveling up. Now, as long as he cultivated hard for a few days, he would definitely succeed. 3 days later, Nietian stood up again. His whole body released a sharp aura. His aura was much stronger. He had successfully leveled up. His strength had risen from late-stage high-level god to peak-level high-level god. Of course, his overall battle prowess wasn't going to improve by much. After all, most of his opponents were paramount gods. Once I become an over-god, my battle prowess will definitely increase qualitatively. Nietian's lips curled up slightly as he murmured. His current battle prowess was not too powerful. It had increased slightly compared to before, but he was one step closer to Overgod. If Nietian's strength increased to the level of Overgod, he would be able to awaken another layer of stellar power within the stellar domain. This would definitely increase Nietian's overall battle prowess tremendously. Moreover, Nietian believed that as long as he reached Overgod, his 9 extremes art of War God would advance further with the laws of Overgods. Right now, Nietian's 9 extremities War God art had only reached the 6th stage, the extreme wind firmament realm. There was still a huge gap between him and the 9th stage. Nietian was filled with anticipation. If he could reach the 9th stage of the 9 extremities War God art and obtain the body of the War God, just how terrifying would he become? However, all of that was still too far away for him right now. Right now, focusing on what was before him was the most important thing. 3 days have passed. I wonder if the master of the divine sword has ended his seclusion? Nietian's lips curled into a smile as he prepared to leave the 9 extremities world. However, at this moment, Fat Cat appeared. With a nimble leap, he landed on Nietian's shoulder. "Fat, are you all right?" Nietian could not help but ask in worry when he saw that Fat Cat was covered in cold sweat and did not look too well. He remembered that there were no powerful beasts in the 9 extremities world. How did Fat Cat end up in such a sorry state? "I'm fine." Fat Cat shook his head and laughed bitterly. "The blood-weeping sword infant is too terrifying. It's really not easy to find a way to restrain it." Nietian's gaze slightly froze. He immediately realized that Fat Cat had been searching for a way to restrain the blood-weeping sword infant these past few days. During the 3 days that Nietian was cultivating, Fat Cat had been searching for a suitable exotic plant and experimenting nonstop, hoping to find a way to restrain the blood-weeping sword infant. Unfortunately, after 3 days, Fat Cat did not succeed. Fat, the blood-weeping sword infant, is an evil technique. How can it be so easy to find a way to restrain it? Nyetian smiled faintly and comforted Fat Cat. Fat Cat shook his head and said, "The blood-weeping sword infant in that little girl's body is already in a state of agitation. Even if Dishur Tian is by her side, I reckon that he won't be able to hold on for long. I must find a way as soon as possible." Nyetian's expression changed. He asked in astonishment, "Is the situation with the dancing dress that urgent?" "Of course." Fat Cat let out a strange cry and said, "Otherwise, I wouldn't waste time in the 9 superbs. It's better to cultivate in the sea of divinity and demons." Nyetian frowned slightly. His gaze swept across Fat Cat's body and found that the latter still had 5 tails. It seemed that the 9-tailed chinchilla would find it more difficult to grow tails in the later stages of cultivation. "Fat, do you still want to continue staying in the 9 superbs?" Nyetian asked with a helpless smile. "No." Fat Cat shook his head and said, "The blood-weeping sword infant is too strange. It's not a solution to keep looking for it. It would be great if there was a blood-weeping sword infant for me to study." Nyetian was speechless. The blood-weeping sword infant was not a good thing. What was the point of studying it? "Nyetian, let's go see that little girl first. I wonder how Dishur Tian is getting along with her," Fat Cat said, and directly returned to the fiend god nascent embryo. Nyetian nodded slightly. With a thought, he directly left the 9 superbs. Nyetian put away the 9 superbs and walked out of the room. He first went to find Ghost Marshal Wildsand and asked the latter about the situation of Divine Sword Master's closed-door cultivation. Unfortunately, Divine Sword Master still did not come out. Nyetian also had no choice but to continue waiting. Jian Jingyun and Ghost Marshal can have been cultivating in the room. The blood-mark seal in their body had not been completely undone. Nyetian left the small courtyard and prepared to look for Lien Wui. But just as he walked out of the small courtyard, he saw Lien Wui's figure in the distance, and beside her was Dishur Tian. Dishur Tian reluctantly followed behind Lien Wui. When he saw Nyetian, his eyes lit up. His figure moved and directly came to Nyetian's side. "Little brother Dishur Tian, why are you running so fast?" Lien Wui saw that and hurriedly ran over. Nyetian looked at Dishur Tian. The latter's small face was gloomy. It seemed that these few days were not going well. But this was also the time when there was no other way. Who asked Fat Cat to personally ask Dishur Tian to accompany Lien Wui? "Nyetian, where is Boss Chinchilla?" Dishur Tian saw Nyetian and asked anxiously, "Why are you looking for this sovereign?" Fat Cat directly appeared on Nyetian's shoulder and looked at Dishur Tian with an unhappy face. "Boss Chinchilla, I have already accompanied the little girl for 3 days. Can I return to the 9 superbs now?" Dishur Tian saw Fat Cat appear and hurriedly asked, "It has only been a few days. Why are you so anxious?" Fat Cat laughed mischievously. Then he looked at Lien Wui and said, "Whenever Miss Lien feels that you can go back, you can come back." Dishur Tian's face was filled with black lines. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. Chapter 1920. "Lord Chinchilla, you're the best." Indra's face was gloomy, but Lien Wui was very happy. She looked at Fat Cat and said with a chuckle. Fat Cat smiled wretchedly. Then his figure moved and directly landed on Lien Wui's shoulder. He said with a mischievous smile, "Miss Lien, this lord is definitely the best person in the world. Lord Chinchilla is the best person in the world." Lien Wui nodded frantically and actually directly hugged Fat Cat in her arms. Nyetian saw this scene and couldn't help but curl his lips. He said in his heart, "I couldn't tell, but this guy Fat is really good at coaxing little girls." The reason why Fat Cat got close to Lien Wui was because he had no other choice. He had to be in close contact with the blood-weeping sword infant so that he could understand the blood-weeping sword infant better and find a way to restrain it. Fat Cat sensed Lien Wui's body for a while, and his face changed again and again. In the end, he didn't say anything, but turned his gaze to Indra and said, Indra, you stay by Miss Lian's side these few days. How's your guidance? This. Indra's face stiffened. He was actually a little embarrassed and couldn't say anything for a while. Don't tell me you didn't guide her. Seeing this, Fat Cat rolled his eyes and let out a strange cry. Indra nodded. He thought that Fat Cat was just saying it casually. He didn't expect that the latter really wanted him to guide Lien Wui. Seeing this, Lien Wui hurriedly said, Lord Chinchilla, actually, it's not little brother Shirtian's fault. I asked him to accompany me to go shopping. Go shopping? Hearing this word, Fat Cat and Nye Tian exclaimed at the same time. They were speechless. Little girl, you two have been going shopping these days? Fat Cat's face sank and asked gloomily. Yes. Lien Wui innocently blinked her eyes and asked, Can't little brother Shirtian go shopping? Little Fat Cat and Nye Tian looked at each other, feeling so depressed that they couldn't say anything. Lien Wui had a swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one by her side. She didn't allow the latter to give her some pointers on her swordsmanship, and instead asked him to accompany her shopping. Sakura was also really formidable. He actually accompanied Lien Wui to stroll the streets. Nye Tian had a look of helplessness on his face as he thought to himself, She's at least 1,000 years old. Why is she acting like a teenage girl? From this, it could be seen that apart from age, a person's maturity was also determined by what they had experienced. If one did not experience certain things, even if one lived for 10,000 years or 100,000 years, it would still be very difficult for a person to grow up. Take Lien Wui, for example. Although she had lived for 1,000 years, she had always been cultivating and had never experienced anything. She had never even left the divine martial city. She was like a little flower in a greenhouse. Of course, she didn't know anything. If Xian Zongfeng knew that Lien Wui had the opportunity to stay with Sakura alone for 3 days, but she used it all to stroll the streets, it was unknown how he would react. Sakura, for the next period of time, you have to guide Lien Wui attentively. Do you hear me? Fat Cat was a little angry. She stared at Sakura and said in a cold tone, Yes. Sakura nodded with an embarrassed expression. He would no longer treat Fat Cat's words as a joke. Okay, you guys go first. Fat Cat didn't want to continue talking. Her figure moved and returned to Nye Tian's body. Sakura had a depressed expression and could only leave with Lien Wui. Fat, did you discover something? Nye Tian couldn't help but frown as he looked at the back of Sakura and Lien Wui. He guessed that Fat Cat must have discovered something. That's why she was angry. Fat Cat nodded, then sighed and said, The blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body has become even more violent. I estimate that in a few months, it won't be able to be suppressed. So soon? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment. His eyes couldn't help but tremble. Fat Cat shook her head and smiled bitterly. Lien Wui is already at the intermediate stage of sword and martial unity. Moreover, the blood-weeping sword infant has been planted in her body since she was young. Of course, it's very strong. Fat, what will happen if the blood-weeping sword infant can't be suppressed? Nye Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. If the blood-weeping sword infant is stronger than the host, it will break out of the host body. The host will then explode and die. Fat Cat nodded and said. Her expression became solemn. This, Nye Tian sucked in a breath of cold air and was speechless. He had a good impression of Lien Wui. The latter was a rare, genius swordsman. If she died like this, it would be a pity. The blood-weeping sword infant is inside Lien Wui's body. My senses are limited, so I can't learn more about the blood-weeping sword infant. It's very difficult to find a way to suppress it. Fat Cat sighed and disappeared. Nye Tian had a helpless expression. If even Fat Cat couldn't do anything, then he couldn't do anything about the blood-weeping sword infant. Nye Tian really wanted to find Xian Zongfeng and ask him if he was the one who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body. Nye Tian returned to his room and continued to cultivate and stabilize his realm. Before the Divine Sword Master's closed-door cultivation ended, he could only wait quietly. The night was deep like water, with a hint of coldness. Nye Tian stood alone in the courtyard, looking at the dark night, thinking of Mo, Rushi, and Cher. I wonder how Rushi and Cher are doing. murmured Nyetion. His eyes were filled with deep longing. Come to think of it, it had been a year since he had parted ways with Mo Rushi and Schwer. During this year, Nyetion's strength had advanced by leaps and bounds. But the enemies he faced were too strong. His current strength was far from being able to compete with them. I have 9 years left. I must become a paramount god, Nyetion said in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with unshakable determination. He was currently at the peak greater god level and had to reach the paramount god level within 9 years. In anyone else's eyes, this would be an impossible task. However, Nyetion firmly believed that he could accomplish it. It had only taken him a year to reach the peak greater god level, and he was confident that he would be able to reach the paramount god level within the next 9 years. But Nyetion understood that the higher one got, the harder it was to increase one's strength, especially after the over-god realm. Every minor level of improvement was more difficult than a major level of improvement. But Nyetion had a heart of steel. He would never give up. Just as Nyetion was thinking about all this, he suddenly felt something strange in the space. He couldn't help but frown, and his expression changed. Someone's there. At the same time, Fat Cat's voice rang out. Nyetion's eyes narrowed. He activated the holographic divine glyph and spread out his divine sense. He found an aura flashing past, flying high into the sky. Who's there? Nyetion growled. He took a step forward and shot up into the sky, following the weak aura in the air. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Nyetion didn't have time to inform Guiwu Kwangsha. He chased after it alone. Chapter 1921. 2 figures sped through the night sky, one in front of the other, like 2 phantoms. In the blink of an eye, the 2 figures had already left the Shinwu city and arrived at a dense forest outside the city. One of the 2 figures was Nyetion. He looked around and faintly felt a trace of uneasiness. He couldn't help but furrow his brows. He became more cautious in his heart and slowed down his pace. Brat, it's too late to feel that something is wrong now. Seeing that Nyetion had slowed down, the figure in front of him slowed down as well. Eventually, he came to a stop in the night sky, the corner of his mouth twitching as he spoke in a cold voice. Crap! Nyetion's expression flickered, and he was just about to turn around when he sensed dozens of auras in the area. In the blink of an eye, dozens of black-garbed swordsmen appeared and surrounded Nyetion. Nyetion's expression flickered as he sent out his divine sense, and his heart sank. These swordsmen were very strong. The weakest of them was a peak overlord, and most were early paramount gods. Their cultivation bases in the Tao of the sword were also at the level of selflessness. It's a trap, Nyetion blurted, his expression grim. If Nyetion had to fight these swordsmen one-on-one, he wouldn't be afraid. But if they teamed up, he wouldn't be a match for them. It really wasn't easy to lure you out, boy. The figure in the lead blurred into motion, moving over to stand next to Nyetion. His face was hidden beneath a black robe, making it impossible to see his features. Nyetion's eyes widened as he realized that this person was a mid-paramount god and had reached the level of the Tao of the sword. Who are you people? How dare you behave atrociously on Evil Wind Island? Nyetion calmed down and said in a deep voice. The black-garbed man chuckled coldly at Nyetion's words. You know this is Evil Edge Island, and yet you still dare to come out? You got guts. Nyetion's expression flickered as he realized that this person had intentionally exposed himself to lure him out. Who were these people? They actually dared to send out dozens of swordsmen at once. This was Evil Wind Island. If they were discovered by the people of the divine Martial Sword Pagoda, they would definitely die. However, Nyetion observed the expression of the man in black. He was not nervous at all, as if he was not worried about being discovered by the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. What are you trying to do by luring me here? Nyetion forced himself to calm down and asked in a cold voice. The man in black smiled and said, Don't worry, we're not here to kill you. We're just here to give you a gift. Gifts? Nyetion was stunned for a moment. He cursed in his heart. A bunch of weasels. They clearly have bad intentions. Why would they come to give gifts? That's right, it's a gift. The man smiled again and said, You're very talented in the art of the sword. I'm afraid that even Lien Wui, the #1 genius in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, can't compare to you. As for me, I can make your talent even stronger. What do you mean? The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but tremble. It's simple. I want to give you a gift to help you increase your talent in the art of the sword. You don't need to thank me. Just cooperate. The man in black smiled cold and sized up Nie Tian with an evil look. Nie Tian's eyes flickered, but his expression was calm. He had already guessed what the man in black was going to give him. The gift didn't scare Nie Tian. Instead, he was a little excited. Crimson Sword Soul. Just then, Fat Cat's excited voice was heard. He had also guessed that the gift the man in black was going to give to Nie Tian was the Crimson Sword Soul. The man in black said that the gift could increase one's talent in the art of the sword. He also mentioned Lien Wui, which confirmed Nie Tian's thoughts. Fat Cat said that the Crimson Sword Soul would only grow faster in the body of a talented person. Therefore, it wasn't strange that these people came to Nie Tian. They thought that Nie Tian's talent was even greater than Lien Wui's. Of course, they wanted to implant the Crimson Sword Soul in Nie Tian's body. Without a doubt, these people had seen how terrifying Nie Tian was. Fat, what should we do? Nie Tian became cold and asked excitedly. Nie Tian, this is a good opportunity. If this guy is really here to give you the Crimson Sword Soul, of course you have to accept it. Fat Cat was even more excited than Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded. He had the same intention. He wanted to accept the Crimson Sword Soul. Although he knew that the Crimson Sword Soul was an evil art and was very dangerous, it could indeed increase his talent in the art of the sword. Moreover, the Crimson Sword Soul would need a long time to grow in Nie Tian's body. Therefore, before the Crimson Sword Soul was fully grown, it would only be beneficial to Nie Tian. As for the future, Nie Tian believed that Fat Cat would be able to find a way to restrain the Crimson Sword Soul. So, are you interested? The man in black saw that Nie Tian didn't say anything and asked. Nie Tian smiled faintly and calmed down completely. He said, I want to see what you want to give me first. Sure. The man in black was very straightforward. He smiled faintly and flipped his palm. A blood-colored vortex appeared in the center of his palm. When Nie Tian saw the blood-colored vortex, he couldn't help but frown. He suddenly felt an abnormal, evil aura. At this moment, the man in black moved his palm slightly. The blood-colored vortex immediately underwent a strange change. It kept spinning, and its color became even redder. There were even a few drops of blood dripping out. It looked very strange. The blood-colored vortex released an evil aura and filled the space. Nie Tian suddenly felt his whole body heat up. The blood in his body seemed to sense it and expanded. His whole body felt like it was about to burn. The sword essence in his body became violent and restless. Yes, this is the seed of the Crimson Sword Soul. At this moment, Fat Cat exclaimed, looking very excited. Although Nie Tian had already guessed it, he still felt excited when he confirmed that the thing in front of him was the Crimson Sword Soul. Previously, Fat Cat said that it would be great if he could have a Crimson Sword Soul for him to study. He didn't expect that the man in black would take the initiative to send the Crimson Sword Soul to him. This was exactly what Nie Tian and Fat Cat wanted. Nie Tian, you have already felt the stimulation from the Crimson Sword Soul. The man in black saw the passion in Nie Tian's eyes. It was obvious that he was very interested. He couldn't help but chuckle and said, How is it? Are you satisfied with this gift? Yes, very satisfied. Nie Tian laughed. The Crimson Sword Soul was sent to his doorstep. There was no reason for him to not be satisfied. So, you're willing to accept this gift? The man in black was startled for a moment. His eyes became passionate. Of course. Nie Tian smiled and said, Tell me, how do you need me to cooperate? Chapter 1922. The man in black's eyes flickered as he stared at Nie Tian. He originally thought that Nie Tian was a powerful character and would reject the Crimson Sword Infant. He didn't expect the latter to be so passionate and eager to get his hands on the Crimson Sword Infant. This brat is only SOSO. He must have felt that the Crimson Sword Infant is good. That's why he's so cooperative. The man in black sneered and thought to himself, However, the Crimson Sword Infant is not a good thing. You will find out in the future just how terrifying it is. Tian didn't care about the man in black's reaction at all. He faintly smiled and said, "Now, can you give me the thing in your hand?" The man in black smiled and waved his hand. The Crimson Sword Infant flew before Tian. Tian took the blood-weeping sword infant and sensed the peculiar aura within it from such a close distance. He instantly had a feeling that his sword intent was surging. The Crimson Sword Infant sure is strange. Tian's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself. He then looked at the man in black and asked, "What should I do next?" "Very simple. You only need to swallow the Crimson Sword Infant." The man in black smiled. He couldn't help but feel nervous, afraid that Tian would play some tricks. "Okay." Tian nodded and smiled. Without hesitation, he swallowed the Crimson Sword Infant. Bang! The moment the sword nascent soul entered his body, Tian felt a violent force rushing through his body, causing him to tremble involuntarily. Immediately after, all the meridians and blood in his body felt a burning pain, as if there were millions of ants gnawing on his body, causing him to feel a burning pain. "This feels good." Tian let out a strange cry. The sudden sharp pain made his face contorted, making him look like a berserk wild beast. Bang! 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 In the next moment, the sword intent inside Tian's body felt the impact of the Crimson Sword Infant. He couldn't control it and began to crazily release it. Waves after waves of terrifying sword intent permeated the air, filling the entire space with a sharp chi. The black-robed swordsmen around Tian retreated, not knowing what was going on. The black-clothed man looked at Tian and frowned. He said in confusion, "When the blood-tear sword infant enters the swordsman's body, it will only slowly fuse with the swordsman's body. The process is very peaceful. Why is this kid so violent?" Just as the black-clothed man was feeling puzzled, Tian raised his head to the sky and howled. His entire body emitted a sword aura that soared into the sky. It was sharp to the extreme, as if it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. How strange! The black-robed man frowned and immediately used his divine sense to probe Tian. His face couldn't help but change. He could sense that there was a very strange power within Tian's body that was clashing with the blood-tear sword nascent soul. It was as if this power was even more evil and terrifying than the blood-weeping sword infant. The black-clothed man was right. At this moment, Tian's body was not only being attacked by the blood-weeping sword infant, but also by the power of the fiend god. The blood-weeping sword infant was an extremely evil power. When it entered Tian's body, it unintentionally triggered the explosion of the power of the fiend god. The power of the fiend god and the blood-weeping sword infant. These two terrifying powers were clashing wantonly in Tian's body. One could imagine the pain he was suffering at this moment. "Tian, hang in there," Fat Cat shouted anxiously. He also didn't expect that the blood-weeping sword infant would actually trigger the power of the fiend god. At this moment, Tian's strength was at the peak of the high god stage. The fiend god original embryo in his body had awakened 256 strands of the power of the fiend god. It was already very terrifying. The power of the fiend god and the blood-weeping sword infant were clashing. The violent power that erupted from the clash was constantly attacking Tian's martial body. If it weren't for the fact that he had the Terra Vein Source, the 3 great forbidden techniques, and the power of the stars, he would have already exploded and died. "Why is it so painful?" Tian growled. Although his whole body felt like it was being torn apart, his consciousness was still clear. He felt that the pain at this moment was even more terrifying than when he had fused the 3 great forbidden techniques. What kind of power does this kid have in his body? How can it be so terrifying that it can actually resist the blood-weeping sword infant? The black-clothed man's expression changed again and again. He was extremely shocked by the power in Tian's body. Fat Cat was also panicking at this moment. He looked horrified and didn't know what to do. Boom! The power of the fiend god turned into an invisible force that crazily attacked the blood-weeping sword infant. It was actually trying to penetrate into the blood-weeping sword infant. The blood-weeping sword infant constantly spun, releasing balls of blood-colored halos to resist the impact of the fiend god's power. However, as the fiend god's power continued to attack, the blood-colored halos around the blood-weeping sword infant became dimmer and dimmer. Its resistance also became weaker. Fiend god's power, attack for me. Nyetian endured the sharp pain and roared in his heart. He controlled all the fiend god's power and turned it into a terrifying force that attacked the blood-weeping sword infant. He didn't know what would happen when the fiend god's power attacked the blood-weeping sword infant, but he had to do something. Otherwise, his martial body wouldn't be able to withstand this kind of impact. Boom! In the next moment, the fiend god's power attacked. Nyetian's body suddenly trembled, and then the blood-weeping sword infant directly exploded, turning into countless blood-colored runes. The fiend god's power immediately condensed into a giant hand, directly wrapped around the blood-colored runes, and actually began to devour them. Nyetian was stunned, completely stunned by the scene in front of him. In just an instant, the blood-weeping sword infant was directly devoured by the fiend god's power, and the blood-colored runes disappeared. Everything that happened so suddenly made Nyetian take a deep breath. His face directly stiffened, and he couldn't speak for a long time. He had never thought that the fiend god's power would actually directly devour the blood-weeping sword infant. After the fiend god's power devoured the blood-weeping sword infant, it immediately returned to the fiend god's origin embryo. Nyetian's body immediately calmed down, as if nothing had happened. The black-clothed man stood not far from Nyetian. Feeling the blood-weeping sword infant's aura disappear from Nyetian's body, his expression became incomparably strange and extremely ugly. Everything that happened in front of him was beyond his expectations, beyond his scope of understanding, and he couldn't accept it. Nyetian was stunned for a full 10 seconds, and his stiff face finally showed a trace of a reaction. His mouth opened wide, but for a moment, he couldn't say a word. He also didn't know what was going on. The fiend god's power devoured the blood-weeping sword infant. Did it affect his body in any way? Nyetian, why don't you try releasing the fiend god's power? At this time, Fat Cat suddenly made a strange sound, a little excited, as if it was eager to prove something. Although Nyetian didn't understand, he still released the fiend god's power and carefully sensed it. But he didn't feel the blood-weeping sword infant's aura. The blood-weeping sword infant was completely devoured by the fiend god's power and completely disappeared. Nyetian couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He originally wanted to use the blood-weeping sword infant to improve his sword Dao strength. Nyetian, release some of your sword intent and try to fuse with the fiend god's power. Fat Cat was extremely excited after sensing the fiend god's power, and said nervously. Chapter 1923. Sword will fuse with the power of the demon and God. Nyetian was shocked when he heard Fat Cat's words. Previously, when he used the power of the demon and God, he had always used it alone. He had never fused it with other powers. Nyetian believed that the power of the demon and God was too powerful to be fused with other powers. At this moment, Fat Cat asked him to fuse the sword will with the power of the demon and God. How could he not be surprised? Nyetian, try it. Seeing that Nyetian didn't move, Fat Cat hurriedly urged. Nyetian was stunned. Although he was confused, he still did as Fat Cat said. He released a stream of sword will and slowly approached the power of the demon and God. At this moment, a strange scene happened. Whoosh! The power of the demon and God absorbed the sword will directly. The scene in front of him made Nyetian gasp. He was shocked and said, "How is this possible?" The power of the demon and God absorbed Nyetian's sword will directly. This was too strange, and Nyetian couldn't accept it. It's like this. Completely different from Nyetian's reaction, Fat Cat shouted in surprise and excitement. The power of the demon and God swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, and obtain the power of the blood-weeping sword infant. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Nyetian frowned and his eyes trembled violently. According to Fat Cat, the power of the demon and God swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, so it obtained the power of the blood-weeping sword will. Nyetian was stunned and only reacted after a long time. Because the power of the demon and God swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, it could absorb sword will and improve the sword will. This was too scary. Nyetian, try to release the sword will and the power of the demon and God. Fat Cat was very excited and reminded Nyetian. Okay. Nyetian nodded heavily. With a thought, the sword intent absorbed by the fiend god power was released again. At this time, Nyetian's expression changed, and he was quite shocked. He could clearly feel that the newly released sword intent was much stronger than before. This undoubtedly meant that the power of fiend gods really possessed the ability to enhance sword intent. That's great, that's really great. Nyetian was overjoyed, and he almost jumped up. After devouring the blood cry sword infant, Nyetian had gained the power to improve his sword intent. In this way, he no longer had to worry about the blood cry sword infant going out of control, since it was no longer inside of him. In other words, Nyetian had obtained the benefits of the blood-sobbing sword infant, yet he had completely avoided the threat of the blood-sobbing sword infant. How could he not be happy and excited? When the man in black saw Nyetian's excited and ecstatic expression, his face sank, and his eyes flashed with cold, murderous intent. Although he didn't know what happened to Nyetian, he didn't feel the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant. This undoubtedly meant that Nyetian was not threatened by the blood-weeping sword infant. His mission this time was to plant the blood-weeping sword infant in Nyetian's body. Now that the mission had failed, he could only kill Nyetian directly. Nyetian felt the cold, murderous intent released by the man in black. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, and he smiled faintly. What's wrong? Do you regret giving me this gift? Brat, what kind of power does your body have? The man in black's eyes were dark, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. Do you really want to know? Nyetian laughed, and at the same time, the sword aura in his body accumulated, and he was ready to attack at any time. Damn it! The man in black roared. He was completely ferocious. He had failed to plant the blood-weeping sword infant in Nyetian's body, so his mission had already failed. He had to kill Nyetian now, or he wouldn't be able to answer to the person behind him. Everyone kill him! The man in black roared when he thought of this, and he immediately gave the order to attack. Yes, the dozens of black-robed swordsmen replied in unison, their voices resounding. Stinking brat, die for me. In the next moment, one of the black-robed swordsmen let out a fierce roar and madly thrust his sword towards Nyetian. Nyetian laughed. Terrifying black inscriptions surged around his body, and his aura skyrocketed, reaching the limit in an instant. He directly struck out with his sword, and the blurs of the sword surged, directly killing the swordsman in black. Nyetian's strength had risen to peak high god. After using the 3 forbidden techniques, he had directly reached peak over god. It was extremely easy for him to kill a swordsman of the same level with a single strike. What a strange fellow! The expressions of the other swordsmen changed when they saw this, but they were not afraid at all. They attacked at the same time, and countless blurs of the sword appeared, like countless huge snakes, pressing towards Nyetian. Nyetian felt the pressure of the sword, and his expression changed slightly. Astral soul wings appeared on his back, and astral soul armor appeared on his body. Starlight heaven wildly slashed out, and the astral soul flame combined with the terrifying sword intent condensed into a flaming sword, whistling and almost burning the heaven and earth. Rumble! A terrifying rumbling sound came from the sky. Nyetian borrowed the power of the sword, and his silhouette rapidly retreated a few thousand meters away. At this moment, there were no experts around him, so he didn't dare to continue fighting. So, it was better for him to leave as soon as possible. How can this brat be so strong? The joint attack of several dozen swordsmen, but Nyetian actually managed to escape. One could imagine the shock in their hearts. A bunch of trash, That black-robed swordsman saw that Nye Tian wanted to leave, and he roared angrily. His silhouette flashed and directly rushed over. Not good, Nye Tian thought, frowning. This black-robed swordsman was a mid-paramount god, and given his current level of strength, it would be very difficult for him to fight him. Starfire incinerates the sea. Nye Tian reacted quickly. Drawing on the power of his astral soul flame, he unleashed a 10,000-meter-long flaming sword that lit up the entire sky. You overestimate yourself, the black-robed swordsman said. Chuckling coldly, he slashed out with his sword, creating a blinding sword image that sliced the flaming sword image in two. Upon seeing this, Nye Tian's heart skipped a beat as he flapped his wings and retreated thousands of meters. The black-robed swordsman was far stronger than Nye Tian could have imagined, and his sword intent was even stronger than Nye Tian's. If he tried to fight him head-on, Nye Tian would definitely be at a disadvantage. Try to run, the black-robed swordsman said. Laughing coldly, he blurred an emotion like a sharp sword that whistled through the air. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected the black-robed swordsman to be so fast. This is bad. If I get tangled up with this guy, it'll be hard to get out of here. Nye Tian cursed inwardly. Even if it meant getting injured, he couldn't let the black-robed swordsman get close to him. However, it was in that exact moment that a fierce sword image pierced through the night sky like an enormous dragon, causing everything to tremble. Bang! A muffled sound rang out, and the black-robed swordsman was sent flying backward. He let out a miserable shriek and then went completely still. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and his lips curled up into a smile. You've come just in time, exalted Ghost Marshal. Nye Tian was no stranger to that sword image. It was none other than Ghost Marshal Wildsand's sword intent. Chapter 1924. Nye Tian suddenly turned around and saw a figure flying over from the night sky. In the blink of an eye, it arrived beside him. It was Guiwu Quang Sha. Nye Tian, are you all right? Guiwu Quang Sha stood still and looked at Nye Tian with a nervous expression. I'm fine. Nye Tian faintly smiled and said, Lord Guiwu came at the right time. If you came a little later, I'm afraid something would have happened to me. Guiwu Quang Sha's eyes narrowed as he looked into the void. Those black-clothed swordsmen had already disappeared without a trace. Nye Tian, what's going on? Guiwu Quang Sha calmed down and asked. Nothing much. I just noticed that there were people outside our courtyard, so I followed them. Nye Tian played it down. He didn't want Guiwu Quang Sha to worry, so he didn't say anything about the blood-weeping sword infant. Someone is watching us? Guiwu Quang Sha's face sank as he roared. I'll go find Xian Zongfeng and ask him what's going on. They were actually being watched in the divine Marshal City's City Lord Mansion. Xian Zongfeng naturally couldn't escape responsibility. Just as Guiwu Quang Sha was getting angry, a voice rang out. Brother Guiwu, what's going on? A figure flew over and directly arrived beside Nye Tian and Guiwu Quang Sha. It was Xian Zongfeng. Why is he here? Nye Tian was stunned. He didn't expect Xian Zongfeng to appear at this time. Lord Sword Master Wu, you came at the right time. I also want to ask you what's going on. Guiwu Quang Sha's face was full of anger as he rebuked. Why are we being watched in the City Lord Mansion? Being watched? Why do you say that? Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a moment. He had an innocent look on his face. Nye Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and faintly smiled. He signaled Guiwu Quang Sha to calm down and said, Lord Sword Master Wu, don't be nervous. Actually, it's nothing. I just felt that someone was hiding in our courtyard, so I chased after them. Those men in black have already left. They might be people from the Thousand Evil sect. Hearing Nye Tian's words, Xian Zongfeng's face sank and he roared. Damn the Thousand Evil sect. They must be here for revenge because I took the initiative to kill the North Sea's 3 evils. How dare you hide in the City Lord's mansion? Do you really think there's no one in the divine Martial Sword Pagoda? Nye Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng's indignant face and smiled, but in his heart, he sneered, Xian Zongfeng, you really know how to take advantage of the situation. I said it's someone from the Wan Xie sect, and you really think it's someone from the sect. I think the most suspicious person should be you. The Shenwu City Lord residence was the most heavily guarded place in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. There were countless swordsmen with Shenwu sword souls guarding the entire residence. The fact that the man in black could sneak into the city lord's mansion without anyone noticing was very strange in itself. What made Nyetian even more suspicious was that no one from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda had appeared, even though he had been fighting with the man in black for so long. The strangest thing was that Xian Zongfeng appeared right after the men in black were scared away by Guiwu Quangsha. This was too much of a coincidence. All the signs indicated that the men in black were not simple. It was very likely that they were from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Needless to say, the person who ordered them to do this was the person in front of him, Xian Zongfeng. Nyetian, are you all right? Xian Zongfeng calmed down and looked at Nyetian with a strange look in his eyes. Why did the man in black lead you here? He asked. Xian Zongfeng said, while looking at Nyetian, as if he was looking for something on Nyetian. However, the usual result made him a little disappointed, and his face became a little gloomy. They didn't do anything. They just wanted to give me a gift. Nyetian smiled and said, while watching Xian Zongfeng's reaction, Gift? What gift? Xian Zongfeng was surprised and asked. Nyetian smiled and said, It's a bloody whirlpool. According to the men in black, it's called something. He purposely pondered and secretly observed Xian Zongfeng's reaction. What is it called? Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled and he asked. I think it's called the Crimson Sword Soul. Nyetian suddenly realized and nodded. It's called the Crimson Sword Soul. The Crimson Sword Soul. When Xian Zongfeng heard these 4 words, his pupils suddenly shrank and his expression changed. He was both shocked and surprised. Nyetian saw Xian Zongfeng's reaction and couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. He thought, Xian Zongfeng, it's really you. Xian Zongfeng's reaction was shocked, but there was no doubt. This meant that he definitely knew about the Crimson Sword Soul. Nyetian, the name Crimson Sword Soul is so evil. What is it? Guiwu Quangsha was stunned and asked with a frown. Comparing Xian Zongfeng and Guiwu Quangsha's reaction, Nyetian was even more certain that Xian Zongfeng was the mastermind. I don't know. Nyetian smiled and shook his head. He then looked at Xian Zongfeng and said, The men in black said that the Crimson Sword Soul can improve the swordsman's talent. He also said that Miss Lian Wui has the Crimson Sword Soul in her body. I wonder if it's true? Lian Wui. Hearing Nyetian mention Lian Wui's name, Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled again. His face was filled with horror and anger. He roared in his heart, Trash. A bunch of trash. You didn't even complete your task, and you actually leaked so much information to others. What a bunch of idiots. Nyetian was right. The group of men in black was sent by Xian Zongfeng. The Crimson Sword Soul in Lian Wui's body was also planted by Xian Zongfeng. Everything was Xian Zongfeng's doing. Sir Master Wu, are you all right? Nyetian frowned and asked with concern when he saw Xian Zongfeng's reaction. If Nyetian still had doubts about his guess before, he was completely convinced after seeing Xian Zongfeng's reaction. He never thought that the divine martial sword master, the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the 9 realms, would do such a despicable thing behind his back. Xian Zongfeng did not even let his own disciple go. This showed how vicious he was. I'm fine. Xian Zongfeng reacted and quickly covered it up. However, there were beads of sweat on his forehead. It's good that you're fine. Nyetian smiled faintly. Although he already knew what Xian Zongfeng had done, he could not do anything to him with his current strength. Therefore, he could only continue to pretend that he did not know anything. Nyetian. At this moment, Xian Zongfeng's expression slightly changed. He suddenly asked, Did you accept the Crimson Sword Soul that the men in black gave you? Of course not. Nyetian smiled and said, I'm not an idiot. I don't know where those men in black came from. How could I accept their gift? Chapter 1925. Xian Zongfeng roared in his heart, but he still pretended to be happy because he did not want Nyetian to notice anything amiss. Unfortunately, Nyetian already knew everything. Nyetian, let's go back. Guiwu Quangsha glanced at Xian Zongfeng and said to Nyetian, Okay. Nyetian nodded slightly and was ready to leave. Immediately, The three of them returned to the castellan mansion. Nie Tian and Guiwu Guangsha returned to the small courtyard. After Xian Zongfeng confirmed that the two of them had returned, he left the castellan mansion. A moment later, Xian Zongfeng's figure appeared in a dark valley on Evil Wind Island. "Get out here!" His figure landed, and he roared. His whole body released a terrifying anger. Just as he finished speaking, dozens of black figures appeared, and the leader was the one who gave Nie Tian the blood-weeping sword soul. "Lord Swordmaster, I know my mistake." The black figure landed and knelt in front of Xian Zongfeng. He was so scared that his voice was trembling. The other black figures also knelt down, not daring to make sound. "Trash! Idiots! A bunch of idiots!" Xian Zongfeng roared with his back facing the crowd. His whole body was trembling, and it was obvious that he was extremely angry. "I know my mistake. Please punish me, Lord Swordmaster." The black figure was trembling in fear and did not dare to raise his head. "Hei Feng, you are the heaven sword soul of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but you can't even deal with a high god ant." Xian Zongfeng suddenly turned around and stared at Hei Feng with a pair of wolf-like eyes. He said in a deep voice, "If you did not plant the blood-weeping sword soul in Ye Tian, it would have been fine. Why did you tell him about the blood-sobbing sword infant? Why did you tell him about the dancing clothes? What's going on in your head? Is it full of shit?" Lord Swordmaster, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand?" Hei Feng was stunned and said in surprise, "I have never said anything about the blood-weeping sword soul, nor did I tell Miss Lien Wui." "You didn't?" Xian Zongfeng was taken aback for a moment before he sneered. "If you don't, then how did Nye Tian know about the blood-weeping sword soul, and how did he know that Lien Wui has it? Tell me everything in detail." Yes. Black Wind was stunned. He had no idea what was going on, so he recounted everything that had happened just now. "What did you say?" Xian Zongfeng's expression changed after hearing Hei Feng's words. A terrifying, murderous intent surged in his eyes as he said, "Hei Feng, do you think I'm a 3-year-old? If Nye Tian really swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, how could his body not have the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant?" This Black Wind felt Xian Zongfeng's murderous intent and suddenly became nervous. He said with a trembling voice, "I don't know either. I really saw Nye Tian swallow the crimson sword infant with my own eyes, and they all saw it too." Xian Zongfeng's expression changed, and his expression became extremely cold. He looked at Hei Feng with his eagle-like eyes, then looked at the other men in black, and asked in a deep voice, "Is what Hei Feng said true?" "Absolutely true." Dozens of black-clothed men spoke in unison. They were extremely imposing. Xian Zongfeng's expression changed again, and his eyes began to flicker. What Hei Feng said was very strange, and he didn't dare to believe it. However, he knew Hei Feng very well. The latter was one of his confidants, and had done many things for him. He had never failed, and he was very loyal to him. There was no way he would betray him. With the testimony of the others, Hei Feng's words were very credible. "Hei Feng, you really didn't mention the blood-weeping sword soul to Nye Tian?" After a long silence, Xian Zongfeng's eyes darkened, and he asked coldly, "No, absolutely not." Hei Feng shook his head and said, "Swordmaster, you know me. No matter how stupid I am, I would never tell anyone about the blood-weeping sword soul." Xian Zongfeng nodded, but his face was extremely stern. Hei Feng was not a fool. How could he take the initiative to tell Nye Tian about the blood-weeping sword soul? "Nye Tian, it seems like you know quite a lot." Xian Zongfeng's face was gloomy, and his heart was cold. "You just came to Shenwu City a few days ago. How would you know about the blood-weeping sword soul? Who exactly is behind you?" Xian Zongfeng was now sure that Nye Tian already knew about the blood-weeping sword soul, but he didn't think that it was Nye Tian who found it out. Instead, he suspected that there was someone behind Nye Tian. As for who was behind Nye Tian, Xian Zongfeng already had a guess. It was Guiwu Guangsha. Guiwu Guangsha, it seems like you haven't given up on the death of Wind and Fire Masters. The corner of Xian Zongfeng's eyes twitched, and he said in his heart, the Wind and Fire Masters he was talking about was Guiwu Guangsha's subordinate, and also the father of Qinyu Tower Master, Wind and Fire Qinyu. There was indeed something fishy about the death of the Wind and Fire Masters, and it was Xian Zongfeng himself. "Sword Master, what should we do?" Heifeng saw that Xian Zongfeng didn't speak, so he raised his head and said, "Should we just kill that kid?" "Don't act rashly." Xian Zongfeng suddenly waved his hand and said, "Nie Tian alone won't be able to find out about the blood-weeping sword soul. There must be someone powerful behind him. Plus, he has Guiwu Quangsha with him. This person's strength is not to be underestimated. If I want to kill him, I will have to do it myself. But now that Gong Sun Sheng is about to come out, we can't do it now. If he notices something, it will be troublesome." Gong Sun Sheng was the name of the other sword master of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. It seemed like Xian Zongfeng was afraid of Gong Sun Sheng. "Sword Master, that kid already knows about the blood-weeping sword soul. Are we just going to let him live?" Heifeng asked with a cold look in his eyes. "Of course we can't let him live." Xian Zongfeng sneered and said, "But we can't kill him directly. We have to use proper means." "Legitimate means?" Black Wind was taken aback. He was puzzled and asked, "What does Sword Master mean?" "Don't ask too much. We just need to stay put and wait for Gong Sun Sheng to come out." Xian Zongfeng's lips curled into a strange smile, and he thought, "Nie Tian, didn't you want the Evil Peak sword competition to be brought forward? Then this sword master will use this matter to kill you fair and square." Xian Zongfeng still wasn't sure who was behind Nie Tian, but he knew that he couldn't let Nie Tian live. Not being able to plant the blood-weeping sword soul in Nie Tian was indeed a failure, but Xian Zongfeng didn't care. The one he cared about right now was someone else, Di Shi Tian. Compared to Nie Tian, Xian Zongfeng wanted to plant the blood-weeping sword soul in Di Shi Tian more. In his opinion, Di Shi Tian's talent in sword Dao was much better than Nie Tian's. Chapter 1926. After Xian Zongfeng had personally experienced Di Shi Tian's sword strength, he had made up his mind to plant a blood-weeping sword soul in the latter's body. These few days, Di Shi Tian's every move was under Xian Zongfeng's control. The reason why he did not make a move on Di Shi Tian was because he was facing a problem. Di Shi Tian's sword cultivation was too high. Generally speaking, the blood-weeping sword soul was planted in young sword geniuses and would grow with the growth of the sword cultivator. Although Di Shi Tian was young, his sword cultivation was too high. A normal blood-weeping sword soul seed could not be planted in his body. Therefore, if Xian Zongfeng wanted to plant a blood-weeping sword soul in Di Shi Tian's body, he had to find a stronger blood-weeping sword soul. Xian Zongfeng had already sent people to make arrangements. The stronger blood-weeping sword soul would arrive soon. As long as the stronger blood-weeping sword soul seed arrived, Xian Zongfeng would not hesitate to attack Di Shi Tian. Di Shi Tian was the target he wanted to attack the most. As for Nie Tian, Xian Zongfeng had some doubts in his heart. He did not understand why the blood-weeping sword soul had no effect on Nie Tian. Nie Tian swallowed the blood-weeping sword soul, but there was no aura of the blood-weeping sword soul in his body. This made Xian Zongfeng very puzzled. However, this was not important. As long as the God Sword Master Gong Sun Sheng came out, Xian Zongfeng would naturally have a way to kill Nie Tian, and he would do it openly. He did not dare to make a move on Nie Tian now, because he was worried that there were experts behind the latter. Unfortunately, all of Xian Zongfeng's guesses about Nie Tian were wrong. The blood-weeping sword soul was discovered by Nie Tian and Fat Cat. It had nothing to do with Guiwu Quangsha. Guiwu Quangsha did not even know about the blood-weeping sword soul. There was no expert behind Nie Tian at all. Xian Zongfeng was thinking too much. "Lord Sword, they already know about the blood-weeping sword soul. How should we deal with it?" At this time, Black Wind's eyes suddenly flickered and transmitted his voice to Xian Zongfeng. "Kill!" The corner of Xian Zongfeng's mouth twitched as he spat out a word coldly. He then took a step forward, and the sword shadows around his body turned into an invisible giant net, covering dozens of black-clothed swordsmen. These people had inadvertently found out about the weeping blood sword infant, so they had to die. "Lord Swordmaster, Immediately, someone sensed that something was wrong, and his expression changed. Just when he was about to speak, he was directly suppressed to death by the terrifying sword intent, and he turned into a ball of bloodlight before he could finish his sentence. At the same time, the other swordsmen were similarly annihilated. Fresh blood drenched the air, and the scene was horrifying and bloody. In the blink of an eye, the mystic Songfeng had killed dozens of divine martial sword souls. When Black Wind saw the scene before him, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. Xian Zongfeng's strength was terrifying, and his methods were ruthless. He was a terrifying person. Black Wind, these people were killed by the Thousand Evil sect. Do you understand? Xian Zongfeng looked at Black Wind cold and said, I understand. Black Wind quickly nodded. It's good that you understand. Let's go. Xian Zongfeng faintly smiled. His figure moved, and he directly left the valley, heading towards the mayor's mansion. At the same time, in the Divine Martial City mayor's mansion, in a small courtyard, Niet Tian and Guiwu Kuang Sha stood side by side. Niet Tian, what exactly happened? Guiwu Kuang Sha asked in a deep voice, with a puzzled expression. He wasn't a fool. Of course, he could see that Xian Zongfeng's reaction was strange, so he wanted to find out. Lord Guiwu, do you really want to know? Niet Tian looked at Guiwu Kuang Sha, his expression extremely solemn. If he told Guiwu Kuang Sha about this, it would be equivalent to dragging the latter into this muddy water. Yes, Guiwu Kuang Sha saw Niet Tian's expression and knew that the latter had something to tell him, so he nodded heavily. All right, since you want to know, I won't hide it from you. Niet Tian nodded and immediately told everything to Guiwu Kuang Sha. The latter was dumbstruck, frozen on the spot, and couldn't react for a long time. After a long time, Guiwu Kuang Sha finally reacted. He looked at Niet Tian and said, Niet Tian, are you sure that Xian Zongfeng is the one who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body? I wasn't sure before, but after what happened just now, I'm certain. Niet Tian faintly smiled and said, Lord Guiwu, you also saw the expression on Xian Zongfeng's face when I mentioned the blood-weeping sword infant and Lian Wui. He is definitely the instigator of all this. Guiwu Kuang Sha solemnly nodded. He had noticed Xian Zongfeng's strange expression, which made him suspicious, and asked Niet Tian about everything. Now that the truth was in front of him, he couldn't doubt it. However, Guiwu Kuang Sha was still shocked. How could he have thought that the usually sanctimonious Xian Zongfeng would do such a despicable and insidious thing behind his back? The most important thing was that Xian Zongfeng's status was too high. As the owner of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, he was someone who stood at the peak of the sword world. Niet Tian, what do you plan to do next? Guiwu Kuang Sha calmed down and asked. I don't know what to do. Niet Tian bitterly smiled and said helplessly, Xian Zongfeng's strength is too strong, and his status is too high. Moreover, we don't have any conclusive evidence. Now we can only hope that the other owner of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda isn't involved in the blood-weeping sword infant. Guiwu Kuang Sha's eyes flickered, but he could only nod in the end. How things would develop next would depend on the other owner. If the other owner was in cahoots with Xian Zongfeng, then there would be no need for Niet Tian and the rest to stay in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Continuing to stay here would only put them in danger. Niet Tian didn't expect that the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, which looked bright and beautiful on the surface, would have such an evil side hidden inside. Niet Tian, you've swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant. Will you be okay? Guiwu Kuang Sha suddenly looked at Niet Tian and asked with a worried face. Lord Guiwu, don't worry. The blood-weeping sword infant will not be a threat to me. Niet Tian smiled and said confidently, That's good. Guiwu Kuang Sha nodded and felt relieved. Then, Niet Tian returned to his room. He decided to stay in the small courtyard for a period of time. He wouldn't go out easily. Staying with Guiwu Kuang Sha would be relatively safer. Inside the room, Niet Tian sat cross-legged and looked inside his body. He wanted to see how much the divine and demon force had changed after swallowing the blood-weeping sword infant. Niet Tian released the divine and demon force and sensed it carefully. He could faintly feel that the divine and demon force had changed a little compared to before. As for what kind of change it was, he couldn't explain it. Niet Tian, from now on, You will try to use the divine and demon force to cultivate your sword intent. I believe that with the help of the divine and demon force, it won't take long for your sword Tao to reach another level. Fat Cat's figure appeared and said proudly, "Okay." Nie Tian nodded. He then moved his consciousness and came to the fifth galaxy, the starry sky sword array. Nie Tian released the divine and demon force in the starry sky sword array and began to cultivate his sword intent. Chapter 1927. 7 days later, in his room, Nie Tian was diligently cultivating his sword will. Within the starry sky sword formation, Nie Tian's divine consciousness sat cross-legged, feeling the surging sword will in the sword formation. With the starry sky sword formation coupled with the power of the divine demon, Nie Tian could clearly feel his sword will skyrocketing. At this moment, he was constantly condensing sword will, charging towards the oblivion state of the sword. He tried several times consecutively, but the sword will always collapsed at the most critical moment. Beads of sweat appeared on Nie Tian's forehead. His entire body was wrapped in sword will, releasing a very mysterious power. Sword will condense. At some point, he roared in his heart, and the sword will in the starry sky sword formation continued to condense towards the center, forming a sword will light ball, within which an extremely terrifying sword will aura flowed. Nie Tian held his breath, and with a single thought, the sword will light ball soared into the sky, turned into a sword gleam, and rushed towards the sky of the starry sky sword formation. Boom! The sword's shadow rushed like a dragon. An endless sword will condensed. In the end, it condensed and did not dissipate, floating in the starry sky sword formation, like a towering giant, looking down on everything. I did it. Nie Tian suddenly stood up, looking at the terrifying sword shadow, and could clearly feel that the sword will contained within it was much more terrifying than before. Damn, I really did it. Almost at the same time, little Fat Cat's voice rang out, and it couldn't help but curse. You're too much of a freak. In just 5 days, you've actually raised your sword Tao cultivation to the realm of sword oblivion. Yes. Nie Tian nodded excitedly, unable to hide the ecstasy on his face. He originally thought that even with the support of the power of the divine demon, it would take him half a month to break through the essence of the sword. But now, he only used 5 days to successfully advance to the oblivion state of the sword, which was too terrifying. If someone saw this scene at this moment, their jaw would definitely drop. Nie Tian's martial arts strength, sword principle strength, improved too quickly. It was incredible. Fatty, I didn't expect to reach the sword oblivion realm in such a short time. Nie Tian smiled happily. Fat Cat's figure directly appeared and stood on Nie Tian's shoulder. She chuckled and said, "Looks like after the power of gods and demons devoured the blood-weeping sword infant, the ability to improve the sword will is even better than the blood-weeping sword infant itself. You really can't stop your dog shit luck." Nie Tian laughed and said, "I can feel it too. After the starry sky sword formation is combined with the power of the demon and god, the speed at which the sword will is increasing is several times faster than before. Moreover, after the power of the demon and god is released, it can even directly double the power of the sword will. That's great news." The Fat Cat smiled proudly and said, "The celestial and demon nascent embryo contains the power of 9,000 celestial and demon. You've only awakened 256 celestial and demon powers, and the improvement of your sword will is already so obvious. If all 9,000 celestial and demon powers are awakened, I wonder how strong your sword will be." Nie Tian nodded firmly. His eyes shone with a burning light. He was like an unsheathed sword, extremely sharp. The entire sea of gods and demons was affected by the power of the demon and god. As more and more celestial and demon powers were awakened, Nie Tian's way of the sword would improve faster and faster. Right now, Nie Tian's strength was at the peak of high god. This was a bottleneck for him, as there was a qualitative leap from peak high god to early overgod. The entire process from a lesser god to a high god was just the strengthening of the godhead. However, it was completely different for overgods. Only by comprehending the power of laws could one become an overgod. Overgod's laws were the symbol of Overgod, as well as the greatest obstacle for cultivators to reach Overgod. However, it was not difficult for Nyetian to comprehend Overgod's laws, as he could passively increase his strength to Overgod after activating the 3 forbidden techniques. He had already become relatively familiar with Overgod's laws during this process. Overgod's laws were a form of comprehension, but they were not very useful in actual battle. As a result, most Overgods did not use the power of laws in battle. Nyetian looked forward to the moment he reached Overgod very much. He did not desire Overgod's laws, but the awakening of even more power of the stars and the increase in the 9 ultimate war god method. Nyetian became cold and murmured, "It's all thanks to the blood-weeping sword nascent that I was able to increase my way of the sword so quickly this time." He knew that the blood-weeping sword nascent's devouring of the power of the demon and god was an impact on his way of the sword. It created an opportunity for him to increase his cultivation. "Nyetian, your current battle prowess has increased by at least several times compared to before," the fat cat said excitedly. "Yeah." Nyetian nodded firmly before leaving the room. Gue Wu Kuangsha was standing in the small courtyard. When he saw Nyetian come out, his gaze involuntarily trembled. His expression changed as he said in astonishment, "Nyetian, your way of the sword has increased." Nyetian nodded his head and said, "Many thanks to Lord Gue Wu for waiting by the side." Gue Wu Kuangsha had been guarding the courtyard for the past few days, secretly protecting Nyetian. "I've really increased by a realm." Gue Wu Kuangsha's gaze trembled. The shock in his heart was written all over his face. Previously, he had sensed sword intent ripples in Nyetian's room. He had guessed that Nyetian was trying to break through to the way of the sword, so he had been guarding the courtyard. However, he had never imagined that in just a few days, Nyetian would actually increase his way of the sword. Nyetian's speed of improvement had once again refreshed his position in Gue Wu Kuangsha's heart. For an ordinary swordsman, it would take hundreds or even thousands of years to increase their way of the sword. Even sword geniuses like Jian Jingyun and Gue Wu can had to accumulate for a very long time before they could achieve an increase in their way of the sword. Compared to other swordsmen, Nyetian was simply a monster. Nyetian faintly smiled. Gue Wu Kuangsha's reaction was so huge that it had caught him unprepared. "Lord Gue Wu, has the divine sword master ended his seclusion?" Nyetian looked at Gue Wu Kuangsha and changed the topic. Gue Wu Kuangsha was slightly stunned. He calmed down and shook his head helplessly, saying, "Not yet. Why is it taking so long?" Nyetian frowned. Previously, Xian Zongfeng had said that the master of the divine sword would come out of seclusion in a few days. Now that 10 days had passed, the master of the divine sword had yet to make a move. This made him worried. Bang! However, at this time, in a certain place in the backyard of the city lord's mansion, a frightening sword force soared into the sky. It transformed into a huge sword light and soared into the sky. What a frightening sword force! The sudden scene caused Nyetian's eyes to tremble, and he cried out in alarm. This is... Gue Wu Kuangsha was also stunned. His mouth was wide open, and he was unable to say anything else. What happened? 2 figures scuttled out at this time and shouted in panic. They were Jian Jingyun and Gue Wu Kan. At the same time, in the Divine Martial City sword field, Di Tian and Lian Wui were originally practicing their swords in the sword formation. When they suddenly saw the huge sword light in the sky, both of them were stunned and shocked. "Little brother Di Tian, what's going on?" Lian Wui frowned and asked nervously. Chapter 1928. Someone has advanced to the legendary realm of the unification of sword and martial arts. Lian Wui was surprised to hear Di Tian's words, and her face stiffened. Di Tian's reaction was very calm, and he only nodded slightly. As the legendary swordsman of the unification of sword and martial arts, he was very familiar with this realm. The sword intent in the sky could not be wrong. At the same time, all the swordsmen in the Shenwu city raised their heads and looked at the dazzling sword radiance in the sky. Their expressions were dull, and their faces were filled with reverence. Of course, they could feel the terrifying sword intent in the sword radiance, and it deeply shocked them. In the governor's mansion, Xian Zongfeng's figure moved, and he flew up and stood on the roof. He looked at the sword radiance with an extremely gloomy expression and said, "Gongsun Shengji, I really did not expect you to advance to the legendary realm." Xian Zongfeng was very sure that the sword radiance in the sky was released by the divine sword master, Gongsun Shengji. He was very surprised that Gongsun Shengji had advanced to the legendary realm of the unification of sword and martial arts. "Gongsun Shengji, should I go congratulate you now?" Xian Zongfeng's lips curled into a cold smile, and then his figure turned into a sword shadow, and he flew towards the backyard of the governor's mansion. At the same time, Niet Tian and the others also rushed towards the backyard. Niet Tian could guess that the sword radiance was definitely caused by the divine sword master coming out of seclusion. After a while, Niet Tian and the others appeared at the same time, and they came to a secluded courtyard. "Sword Master Wu." Niet Tian saw Xian Zongfeng, and he smiled faintly as he greeted him. Xian Zongfeng nodded slightly, and there was an ugly smile on his face. Bang! At this moment, a muffled sound came from the courtyard, and then a figure calmly walked out. His entire body was surging with sword intent, and a halo surrounded him. The sword radiance was dazzling, and it looked extremely holy, and it made people feel reverence. However, when this figure walked out and appeared in front of everyone, Niet Tian and the others couldn't help but be stunned, and their faces stiffened. The figure that walked out of the courtyard was a short and stout old man with a grizzled goatee. His hands were behind his back, and his eyes were narrowed into slits. There was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and he appeared to be at ease. "This!" Niet Tian's eyes flickered, and he screamed in his heart. "Isn't this the old version of Jean de Bayo?" If one were to look at the old man's physique, it would definitely be the same as Jean de Bayo's. The width of the old man's body was the same as that of Jean de Bayo's, making him look like a large ball. The short and stout old man walked out slowly and glanced at the crowd without saying a word. Xian Zongfeng stepped forward and said sincerely, "Brother Gongsun, congratulations on coming out of seclusion. Your sword Dao has advanced to the legendary realm. Lord Divine Sword Master, congratulations." Guiwu Kuangsha also slightly nodded his head and said. Niet Tian turned around and looked at Jian Jingyun and Guiwu Kan. The latter two also had ugly expressions. The three of them didn't expect that the Divine Sword Master of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda would look like this. Although the Divine Sword Master and the Sword Master Wu were the two Sword Masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda and were usually mentioned together, there was an obvious difference in their statuses. The Divine Sword Master's status was obviously higher than the Sword Master Wu's. It was like the Heaven and Earth Masters of the inescapable net, and the Heaven Master's status was higher than the Earth Master's. The Divine Sword Master in front of Niet Tian and the others was known as the #1 swordsman of the 9 zones. However, this #1 swordsman's physique was a bit awkward. No matter how surprised Niet Tian and the others were, they had to accept that the fat old man in front of them was the Divine Sword Master of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, Gongsun Shengji. "Brother Zongfeng, you've worked hard during the time I was in seclusion." Gongsun Shengji finally spoke with a loud voice like a bell. He looked at Xian Zongfeng and laughed. "Did anything happen in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda?" Xian Zongfeng smiled and bowed. "It's nothing. A few days ago, the 3 devils of the North Sea came to cause a ruckus, but I sent them away." "That's good." Gongsun Shengji didn't ask further. He looked at Guiwu Sha and smiled. "Brother Guiwu, I haven't seen you in a while. What brings you to Shenwu City?" "It's a long story." Guiwu Sha laughed and said, "Sir Divine Sword Master, to be honest, I have a favor to ask this time. Brother Guiwu, you are from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. We're all on the same side, so there's no need to be so formal." Gongsun Shengji nodded and smiled. "Let's talk about it in the meeting room." "Okay, Brother Gongsun, please." Xian Zongfeng quickly nodded and moved aside, letting Gongsun Shengji walk in front. Gongsun Shengji didn't stand on ceremony. His fat body walked in front like a walking millstone. From the beginning to the end, Gongsun Xingji didn't even look at Nie Tian and the others. This fat old man is quite arrogant. Nie Tian laughed in his heart and followed. A moment later, everyone arrived at the meeting room. Gongsun Xingji and Xian Zongfeng sat on the left and right side of the hall respectively. Gui Wuxia sat on the right, while Nie Tian and the others stood without taking a seat. Nie Tian looked at Gongsun Xingji and Xian Zongfeng and thought, these two sword masters, one fat and one skinny, they complement each other well. Xian Zongfeng was originally a skinny man, and when he sat next to Gongsun Xingji, it was even more obvious that he was sitting like a stick. At this time, Gongsun Xingji's eyes slowly fell on Nie Tian and the others, and said in a lazy tone, "Who are these kids?" Xian Zongfeng didn't speak, but looked at Gui Wuxia. The latter was about to speak, but saw Nie Tian take a step forward. He couldn't help but frown, and swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. "Lord Divine Sword Master, I am Junior Nie Tian, a friend of Master Gui Wu." Nie Tian took a step forward, bowed slightly, and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "I am Jian Jingyan." "I am Gui Wu Can." Jian Jingyan and Gui Wu Can both reacted and said, "Huh?" Gongsun Xingji's eyes locked on Nie Tian, as if he had discovered something. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and his face was full of surprise, but he quickly calmed down and laughed. "Little kid, your talent is simply terrifying. Lord Divine Sword Master is overpraising me." Nie Tian smiled and replied calmly. Then, Gongsun Xingji's eyes swept over Jian Jingyan and Gui Wu Can, and he said, "The two kids from the Jian family and Gui Wu family are also quite talented, but compared to this kid named Nie Tian, they are far behind." Jian Jingyan and Gui Wu Can nodded slightly, and they didn't feel uncomfortable. After all, they already knew that their talent was far behind Nie Tian's. "Little kids, please take a seat." Gongsun Xingji smiled faintly, and he gestured for Nie Tian and the others to sit down. Jian Jingyan and Gui Wu Can sat down, but Nie Tian didn't. Instead, he took another step forward, looked at Gongsun Xingji, and said, "Lord Divine Sword Master, I came to the Shinwu City this time to ask for a favor from the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. Since Lord Divine Sword Master has already come out of seclusion, I don't want to waste any more time, so I will be straightforward." Gongsun Xingji looked at Nie Tian, and his eyes couldn't help but freeze. This was the first time he saw someone so impatient to ask for a favor. Chapter 1929. In the Great Hall, Gongsun Sheng looked at Nie Tian with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. He guessed that Gui Wu Quangsha brought Nie Tian to the Shinwu City to join the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. In fact, most swordsmen who came to the Shinwu City were here to join the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. Gongsun Sheng had never seen someone as talented as Nie Tian at such a young age. Therefore, as long as Nie Tian asked to join the Shinwu Sword Pagoda, Gongsun Sheng would agree without any hesitation. Gongsun Sheng even had another idea, to take Nie Tian as his disciple. He felt that Nie Tian's talent in swordsmanship was even greater than Lien Wui's. He would have no regrets if he could take in such an outstanding disciple. Unfortunately, Gongsun Sheng was completely wrong. Nie Tian did not come to the Shinwu City to join the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. Xian Zongfeng looked at Nie Tian with a strange smile on his face. His eyes flickered as if he was waiting for a good show. He had worked with Gongsun Sheng for many years and knew the latter very well. Although Gongsun Sheng looked gentle and amiable, he was a very arrogant and stubborn person. He would never allow anyone to break the rules of the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. Nie Tian wanted to bring forward the Evil Edge sword competition, which was challenging Gongsun Sheng's bottom line. Gui Wu Quangsha's heart was in his throat. He was also worried about how Gongsun Sheng would react after Nie Tian revealed his real purpose. Nie Tian nodded slightly and said calmly, "Divine Sword Master, I came to the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda in the hope that you can bring forward the Evil Edge sword competition." Before Nie Tian could finish, Gongsun Sheng's face suddenly darkened. His eyes were extremely gloomy, and an imperceptible sword essence surged around him. Xian Zongfeng sensed Gongsun Sheng's reaction and couldn't help but twitch his lips. He sneered and said, Tian, let's see how you deal with this. Old man Gongsun's tiger, but is not something that anyone can touch. The expression on Guiwu Quang Sha's face changed, as his nerves instantly tensed up. He was even worried that Gongsun Sheng would suddenly attack and kill Tian. Gongsun Sheng's face darkened as he stared at Tian with cold eyes. After a while, he said in a cold voice, "Kid, your talent is not bad. I will pretend that I didn't hear what you just said." The evil edge sword duel was held once every 30,000 years. This was a rule that had been set since the Xinwu Sword Pagoda was founded. It had never changed in the past million years. Tian had requested Gongsun Shengji to hold the evil edge sword competition in front of him, which was a blatant provocation in the latter's eyes. If not for the fact that Tian was brought here by the ghost Marshal Wildsand, and that his talent in the way of the sword was monstrously terrifying, Gongsun Sheng would have definitely killed him. Anyone who had heard of Gongsun Shengji knew that this old man was outrageously stubborn. Tian was stunned. He could sense the suppressed anger in Gongsun Shengji's eyes, and even suppressed killing intent. He did not expect Gongsun Shengji to be so troublesome. Before he could say anything, the latter was already on fire. "Divine Sword Master, I came to Evil Edge Island for the Evil Edge Sword Duel. I must get it done." Tian calmed down a little, took a step forward, and said faintly. He had said the same thing to Xian Zongfeng. The latter's reaction at that time was to kill Tian. He did not know how Gongsun Shengji would react now. "How dare you?" Suddenly, Gongsun Shengji growled and stood up. His entire body surged with sword aura, and the entire conference hall suddenly became shaky. If it was not for the protection of the sword formation, it would have collapsed into ruins. Boom! A violent pressure was suddenly released, pressing towards Tian. In an instant, Tian felt an endless and terrifying pressure coming from the space around him. He could not avoid it at all, and could only bear it. Tian's body trembled, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. His face twisted under the enormous pressure, but the determination in his eyes did not change. Tian, upon seeing this, Jian Jingyun and Gue Wushan sprang to their feet at the same time and exclaimed in shock. Gongsun Shengji was the #1 swordsman in the 9 zones. The pressure he released was enough to kill ordinary paramount gods. At this moment, Tian didn't even have the chance to use his 3 forbidden techniques. How could he withstand such a terrifying sword aura? Gue Wushan's eyes trembled, and his face was also filled with shock. He did not dare to make a move, because he knew that if he did, Gongsun Shengji would kill Tian without hesitation. What a powerful martial body! Xian Zongfeng looked at Tian, and his eyes narrowed. He could sense that the pressure Gongsun Shengji was releasing was enough to kill an early-stage paramount god. But Tian was able to withstand it, which showed how powerful his martial body was. "Kid, take back what you just said, and I will spare your life." Gongsun Shengji's face fell. He was shocked by how powerful Tian's martial body was. Then he said in a low voice, giving Tian a second chance to live. Tian looked like he was in pain, but the sharpness in his eyes did not diminish. He could not speak, and could only shake his head with difficulty. He had to bring forward the evil edge sword duel. This was his goal, and it would not change. Gongsun Shengji's face fell, and his eyes shone with killing intent. He growled, "Kid, you're forcing how to make a move. Don't blame I for what happens next." As his voice fell, Gongsun Shengji released an even more powerful sword aura. It was like a rolling wave that kept battering at Tian. At that moment, black runes seeped out of Tian's body. At the same time, a strange power surged within his body. He forcibly released his fiend god energy, trying to activate the 3 forbidden skills to resist Gongsun Shengji's aura. Given Gongsun Shengji's status, if his sword aura couldn't kill Tian, he would be too embarrassed to do so. Gongsun Shengji suddenly sensed that Tian's aura was growing stronger. His face fell, and he was horrified. He could not imagine that a high god martial artist could actually resist under his pressure. Boom! However, In the next moment, Nie Tian's entire body suddenly released violent black runes, and the sword aura around him suddenly erupted, and a terrifying sword aura instantly bloomed. At this moment, everyone's eyes trembled, and their faces were filled with extreme shock. Gongsun Shengji's eyes turned slightly cold, as though he had discovered something. He stretched out his hand and released an enormous sword essence, directly suppressing Nie Tian's sword aura. Nie Tian's body trembled, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. His face turned as white as a sheet, but he still raised his head and stared at Gongsun Shengji with a pair of resolute eyes. He did not expect that Gongsun Shengji, an expert at the peak of the sword world, would not only use his sword aura to suppress a junior, but also attack him directly. Chapter 1930. In the great hall of the city lord's mansion, Gongsun Sheng's eyes suddenly shone with killing intent. He directly attacked Nie Tian, intending to kill the latter. Seeing this, Guiwu Kwangsha's expression changed, and he cried inwardly, "Not good. Gongsun Sheng already knows Nie Tian's identity. This is bad." Guiwu Kwangsha already knew that Nie Tian was a fiend god nascent embryo, and was the grandson of the Wind and Cloud Alliance's Master Nie Dao. This was a secret that absolutely could not be let to others, especially Gongsun Sheng, because Gongsun Sheng and Nie Dao were mortal enemies. Originally, with Gongsun Sheng's identity, it was impossible for him to directly attack Nie Tian. He must have sensed Nie Tian's identity, which was why he suddenly attacked. Everyone in the Nine Realms knew about the grudge between Nie Dao and Gongsun Sheng. A long time ago, Nie Dao and Gongsun Sheng had been good friends, but an engagement had caused the two to completely fall out. Speaking of this engagement, it had caused an uproar in the Nine Realms, to the point that almost everyone knew about it. The two parties of the engagement were Nie Dao's eldest son, Nie Fenghua, and Gongsun Sheng's daughter, Third Lady Gongsun. Nie Fenghua and Third Lady Gongsun had known each other since they were young, and could be said to be childhood sweethearts. The two were originally about to get married, but on the day of the wedding, something unexpected happened. Nie Fenghua ran away from the wedding. On the day of the wedding, all the influential people in the Nine Realms were present. Nie Fenghua's escape greatly enraged Gongsun Sheng. He believed that Nie Fenghua's escape was a great humiliation to the Gongsun family, and made them the laughingstock of the Nine Realms. Later, despite Nie Dao's numerous apologies, Gongsun Sheng ignored them and swore that the Gongsun family would no longer have any dealings with the Nie family. From then on, Gongsun Shengji and Nie Dao went from being good friends to being sworn enemies who never interacted with each other. Guiwu Kwangsha had been worried that Nie Tian's identity would be exposed, which would incite Gongsun Sheng's rage. But he had forgotten, so he didn't have time to tell Nie Tian. At this moment, Gongsun Sheng had sensed the aura of the god-restricting fetus on Nie Tian. Coupled with his surname, he immediately knew that Nie Tian was from the Nie family. People from the Fengyin Nie clan had appeared in the Divine Martial City and requested for the Evil Peak Sword competition to be held in front of Gongsun Shengji. In Gongsun Shengji's opinion, this was the most blatant provocation. Gongsun Sheng would have killed Nie Tian long ago if he didn't want to confirm Nie Tian's identity. Under Gongsun Shengji's pressure, Nie Tian was bleeding profusely from the corner of his mouth. His entire body was twisted, and his bones crackled as if they were about to shatter at any moment. Gongsun Shengji was too strong. Nie Tian was no match for him. Nie Tian kept his mind clear. He was very curious as to why Gongsun Sheng would suddenly become enraged. "My relationship with the Alliance Master is none of your business." Nie Tian raised his head with difficulty and stared at Gongsun Shengji with his bloodshot eyes. Gongsun Shengji's eyes darkened. He took a step forward, and his aura surged as he roared, "Brat, you're courting death." At this moment, Gongsun Shengji didn't care about anything else. He didn't care about the relationship between Nie Tian and Nie Dao. As long as he was sure that Nie Tian was from the Nie family, it was enough reason to kill him. "Gongsun Shengji, don't kill him." Guiwu Guangsha suddenly sensed Gongsun Shengji's murderous intent and screamed, but he didn't dare to move. He knew that even if he made a move, he wouldn't be able to stop Gongsun Shengji. On the other side, Xian Zongfeng's eyes were shining brightly. He noticed that Gongsun Shengji's actions were a little unusual, but he didn't know why. However, if Nie Tian died in Gongsun Shengji's hands, it would be great news for him. In this way, the people behind Guiwu Guangsha and Nie Tian would only look for Gongsun Shengji and wouldn't care about Xian Zongfeng anymore. Don't kill him. Almost at the moment when Gongsun Sheng made his move, an anxious voice suddenly rang out. Then, a figure flew over like a sharp blade of wind and frost, flying straight at him. San Yang. When Gongsun Shengji heard the voice, his face suddenly changed. He stopped what he was doing and screamed. He raised his head to look at the figure outside the hall. Everyone was stunned at this moment. Then, their gazes turned to the outside of the hall, and a graceful figure in green appeared in their line of sight. It was a woman with beautiful facial features. She looked very young, only in her 20s, but her beautiful eyes couldn't hide the vicissitudes of life. Third Lady Gongsun. Guiwu Guangsha couldn't help but shout when he saw the face in front of him. The woman who suddenly appeared was none other than Gongsun Shengji's only daughter, Third Lady Gongsun. Xian Zongfeng looked at Third Lady Gongsun and couldn't help but frown. He thought to himself, Third Lady Gongsun, why did she suddenly appear? Third Lady Gongsun's appearance was out of everyone's expectation, and it made the atmosphere even more strange. Third Lady, why are you here? Gongsun Shengji looked at his daughter and restrained his aura. His face was full of surprise and surprise. It turned out that ever since Nie Fenghua ran away from the marriage, Third Lady Gongsun had ignored everyone. Even Gongsun Shengji rarely saw her. Because of this, Gongsun Shengji hated Nie Fenghua and the Nie clan even more. Third Lady Gongsun's sudden appearance was something that Gongsun Shengji could never have imagined. Father, you've broken through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. I wanted to see you. Third Lady Gongsun said lightly. Her eyes were cold. Her gaze swept across Nie Tian, and her expression became a little strange. Third Lady, I'm so happy that you're willing to come out. Gongsun Shengji was so happy that he even forgot about Nie Tian. At this moment, Third Lady Gongsun's expression did not look good. She frowned and looked at Gongsun Shengji. Father, he's just a child. With your status, why did you kill him? Gongsun Shengji's expression became slightly ugly. He coughed and said, Third Lady, don't ask about this. I have my reasons for killing him. Father. Third Lady Gongsun could sense that Gongsun Shengji was deliberately hiding it from her. Gongsun Shengji's expression changed and became ugly. He hesitated for a moment, then finally said, he's from the Nie clan. From the Nie clan? Third Lady Gongsun was stunned for a moment. She then looked at Nie Tian again and suddenly noticed that his eyes were so familiar. She couldn't help but be stunned. Why are his eyes so similar to that person's? Third Lady Gongsun's eyes flickered as she exclaimed in her heart. The Nie Tian in front of her reminded her of someone, Nie Fenghua. Third Lady Gongsun immediately remembered that Nie Tian was from the Nie clan. She exclaimed in her heart again, could he be? The sudden thought caused Third Lady Gongsun's expression to stiffen. She stood rooted to the ground. Third Lady, are you all right? Gongsun Shengji saw that Third Lady Gongsun was stunned and couldn't help but be furious. He stared at Nie Tian and roared. This kid must have reminded you of the past. I kill him. Chapter 1931. Third Madam, what are you doing? Seeing Third Madam Gongsun suddenly stand in front of Nie Tian, Gongsun Shengji was stunned. He's a member of the Nie family. Why are you protecting him? Father, what happened back then is already in the past. It doesn't matter if he's a member of the Nie family, Third Madam Gongsun said calmly. Gongsun Shengji was confused. He didn't understand why Third Madam Gongsun would suddenly act like this. Guiwu Guangsha and Xian Zongfeng were also shocked. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Little brother, are you okay? Third Madam Gongsun turned to Nie Tian. Her expression was calm and even showed a trace of care. I'm fine. Thank you for saving me, Miss Gong's son. Yet Tian nodded slightly. His body had recovered, and his pale face had regained some color. If third Madame Gong's son hadn't appeared in time, Nye Tian would have been in real danger. Nye Tian now knew the relationship between third Madame Gong's son and Gong's son Xingji. He couldn't believe that Gong's son Xingji had such a beautiful daughter. He also found it strange that third Madame Gong's son would save him. Moreover, he felt that third Madame Gong's son looked at him strangely, giving him an indescribable feeling. It was as if Nye Tian was a very important person to third Madame Gong's son. What's your name? Third Madame Gong's son looked at Nye Tian and asked through voice transmission. Nye Tian. Nye Tian froze for a moment before replying. Third Madame Gongsuan's eyes trembled. Then she asked again, Nye Fenghua is your father, right? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He hesitated for a moment, but still nodded. You really are his son? Third Madame Gong's son was stunned. She screamed in her heart and trembled. She took a few steps back and almost fell. Gong's son Xingji stepped forward and supported third Madame Gong's son. He asked nervously, Third Madame, are you okay? Third Lady Gong's son stared blankly for a long time before finally coming to her senses. She shook her head, indicating that she was fine. Third Lady Gong's son glanced at Nye Tian, then said to Gong's son Xingji, Father, can you please not kill him? Gong's son Sheng was stunned for a moment, but in the end, he nodded. Nye Tian, you can leave now. Don't ever come to godly Martial City again. Third Lady Gong's son looked at Nye Tian with a strange expression and said faintly, Nye Tian, let's go. Seeing this, Ghost Marshal Wild Sand immediately went to Nye Tian's side, preparing to leave. Third Madame Gong's son begged for mercy, and Gong's son Sheng was willing to let Nye Tian go. This was the best result. Gong's son Xingji looked at Nye Tian with a complicated expression. He was amazed by Nye Tian's freakish recovery ability. Just now, he had almost killed Nye Tian. The latter's flesh and bones were under great pressure, but he was able to recover in the blink of an eye. It was really terrifying. No, unexpectedly, Nye Tian didn't plan to leave. Instead, he looked at Gong's son Xingji with burning eyes and said word by word, Divine Sword Lord, you haven't agreed to the matter of the evil edge sword discourse. I can't leave. When Nye Tian's voice fell, the atmosphere suddenly changed, becoming oppressive and deathly silent. Xian Zongfeng and Ghost Marshal Wildsand looked at Nye Tian in shock. They didn't expect the latter to dare to say such a thing under such circumstances. This was simply challenging the limits of Gong's son Shengji's patience. They had to admit that Nye Tian was indeed courageous. He wasn't afraid of death and wouldn't give up until he reached his goal. Gong's son Shengji's relieved expression sank again. He even suspected that he had misheard. He looked at Nye Tian in disbelief and coldly asked, What did you say? Nye Tian didn't avoid Gong's son Xingji's gaze and faintly said, You haven't agreed to the matter of the evil edge sword discourse. I can't leave. You're courting death. Gong's son Xingji's pupils shrank as his killing intent was released. He was like an enraged wild beast about to kill Nye Tian. Father. Once again, Third Lady Gongsuan's voice sounded. She reached out and stopped Gong's son Xingji. Gong's son Xingji's eyes widened. He didn't understand why Third Lady Gongsun wanted to save Nye Tian. After stopping Gong's son Xingji, Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nye Tian and asked, Nye Tian, what do you mean by the evil edge sword discourse? Nye Tian thought for a while and said, I want the evil edge sword discourse to be brought forward. Third Lady Gongsuan's beautiful eyes trembled. She didn't expect Nye Tian to ask for such a thing. No wonder Gong's son Xingji was so angry. Stinking brat, you are a member of the Nye family. I'll let you go, which is already a huge concession. Don't be so ungrateful. Gong's son Xingji was furious and roared. You want the evil edge sword discourse to be brought forward with just one sentence? Impossible. Father. Before Gong's son Xingji finished speaking, Third Lady Gongsuan's voice suddenly sounded. Then, she actually turned around and knelt in front of Gongsun Xingji. Third lady, what are you doing? Gongsun Xingji was stunned by third lady Gongsuan's sudden action. He immediately went forward and tried to pull her up. Father, I have a request. If you don't agree, I won't get up. Third lady Gongsun raised her head and looked at Gongsun Xingji. She was actually unwilling to get up. Third lady, what is it? Father will agree. Hurry up and get up. Gongsun Xingji was astonished. He didn't know what third lady Gongsun wanted to do. Third lady Gongsuan's beautiful eyes flickered. She said in a deep voice, Father, I want you to agree to Nie Tian's request. Her voice wasn't loud, but it made the entire hall fall into a deathly silence. No one expected that third lady Gongsun would kneel for Nie Tian. Nie Tian's expression also changed. He was extremely shocked. Third lady, do you know what you were doing? Gongsun Xingji was stunned for a few seconds. When he came back to his senses, he roared furiously. Father, I know I'm making things difficult for you, but I only have one request. Please agree. Third lady Gongsun raised her head and looked at Gongsun Xingji. Her eyes were filled with determination. Third lady, Gongsun Xingji's expression was complicated. His face seemed to have aged a lot. He said in grief, Why are you doing this? Haven't the Nie family harmed us enough? Nie Fenghua ran away from the marriage and made you the laughingstock of the 9 realms. Our Gongsun family can't raise our heads. Have you forgotten? If I bring forward the evil edge sword meat, how will the people of the 9 realms look at us? Where will the dignity of the divine martial sword tower go? Have you thought about all of this? Gongsun Sheng was like an enraged wild beast as he said those words one after another. Gongsun Sheng was filled with grief and hatred. Father, I know what you're saying. Third lady Gongsuan's eyes were filled with determination. She said, But let your daughter be willful for once. Promise me. Why? Why? Gongsun Xingji looked at third lady Gongsun with a pained expression and roared crazily. Third lady Gongsun didn't say anything. She only said in her heart, Because I own Nie Fenghua. I have to pay him back. Third lady Gongsun didn't say anything. Gongsun Xingji didn't nod. The situation fell into a stalemate. The atmosphere was suffocating. The hall was so silent that even a pin drop could be heard. After a long time, Gongsun Xingji suddenly asked Xian Zongfeng, What do you think about this? He looked at Xian Zongfeng. Chapter 1932. Gongsun Xingji asked for Xian Zongfeng's opinion. His intention was obvious. He hoped that Xian Zongfeng would oppose this. After all, the evil edge sword competition was related to the entire Shenwu sword pagoda. Even if Gongsun Xingji agreed to bring forward the competition, things would be difficult if Xian Zongfeng strongly opposed it. Xian Zongfeng coughed and glanced at Nie Tian. Finally, his eyes landed on Gongsun Xingji and said, Brother Gongsun, I think we can agree to bring forward the competition. Huh? Before Xian Zongfeng finished, Gongsun Xingji was surprised. He thought he had heard wrong. In the past, Xian Zongfeng had always listened to his opinion. Why did he suddenly change his mind this time? Cough. Xian Zongfeng coughed again and said, Brother Gongsun, you may not know this, but there is a legendary realm swordsman with Nie Tian. Gongsun Sheng was taken aback. He said subconsciously, That's impossible. There is no legendary realm swordsman in the 9 realms. Gongsun Xingji was very familiar with all the famous swordsmen in the 9 realms. He had never heard of anyone reaching the legendary realm. Brother Gongsun, this is absolutely true. Not only have I seen that swordsman, but I also competed with him in sword intent and lost. Xian Zongfeng said, while observing Gongsun Xingji's reaction. Gongsun Xingji's expression changed again. He frowned and said, Could it be that someone from the 9 realms has reached the legendary realm before me? After his seclusion, his swordsmanship cultivation had advanced to the legendary realm. He originally thought that he was the only legendary swordsman in the 9 realms, but now another legendary swordsman had suddenly appeared, which was somewhat unacceptable to him. Yes, Xian Zongfeng nodded and said, What's even more strange is that the legendary realm swordsman is a child of 6 or 7 years old. A child? Gong Sun Xingji's expression changed again. He waved his hand and said, "That's impossible. In the 9 realms, if someone reached the legendary realm, he must be a famous swordsman. It can't be a child." What Xian Zongfeng said was too strange for Gong Sun Sheng to accept. Xian Zongfeng laughed, then looked at Guiwu Guangsha and said, "Brother Guiwu can testify for this matter. Guiwu Guangsha, is this true?" Gong Sun Sheng turned around and asked Guiwu Guangsha. "It's true." Guiwu Guangsha nodded. He did not quite understand why Xian Zongfeng would mention Di Shitian at this time, and what was his intention. Gong Sun Sheng's expression was twisted. It took him a long time to recover. He looked at Xian Zongfeng and said, "Xian Zongfeng, even if the legendary swordsman you mentioned exists, so what? Does it have anything to do with whether we should bring forward the evil edge sword duel?" "It does." Xian Zongfeng smiled strangely and said, "Brother Gong Sun, as far as I know, apart from you, this legendary swordsman is the only one in the 9 realms. Since this lord has come to Shenwu City, why don't we invite him to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda?" Gong Sun Sheng frowned and immediately understood that Xian Zongfeng wanted this legendary swordsman to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. However, Niet Tian and Guiwu Guangsha were stunned and immediately thought of something. They already knew that Xian Zongfeng was not a good person. Xian Zongfeng must have an ulterior motive for inviting Di Shitian to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. It was not hard to guess. Xian Zongfeng wanted Di Shitian to stay in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. This way, he could better control Di Shitian and wait for the opportunity to plant the blood-weeping sword infant in his body. Gong Sun Sheng glanced at Xian Zongfeng and said, "Xian Zongfeng, if you have something to say, just say it." "Okay." Xian Zongfeng smiled faintly and looked at Niet Tian and said, "Niet Tian, if you want the evil edge sword duel to be brought forward, you must agree to 2 conditions. First, you must let Lord Di Shitian join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Second, you must participate in the Shura Sword Field this time." Shura Sword Field. Hearing Xian Zongfeng mention this name, Guiwu Guangsha and Third Lady Gong Sun could not help but stare blankly, exclaiming at the same time, "What's the Shura Sword Field?" Niet Tian asked. The Shura Sword Field is used to select new members of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. It's a sword competition. Xian Zongfeng's lips twitched. Niet Tian smiled faintly and said, "I can participate in the Shura Sword Field, but whether Di Shitian joins the Shenwu Sword Pagoda or not is his own business. I have no right to decide." Xian Zongfeng smiled and insisted, "That won't do. Lord Di Shitian must join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda." Xian Zongfeng had already thought of these 2 conditions. Letting Di Shitian join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was to make him stay. The reason why he wanted Niet Tian to participate in the Azura Sword Field was to kill him. The Shura Sword Field was a very cruel place. It was definitely not as simple as Xian Zongfeng said. Niet Tian frowned and couldn't help but feel troubled. He wasn't worried about the Shura Sword Field at all, but it will be difficult for Di Shitian to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Di Shitian was one of the founders of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda and the first sword master of the pagoda. Letting him join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was a bit difficult. Although Fat Cat could order Di Shitian to do so, Niet Tian didn't want to make things difficult for Di Shitian. "No need." While Niet Tian was in a dilemma, Gong Sun Sheng suddenly said, "Niet Tian, as long as you can pass the Shura Sword Field, I will agree to your request. As for the legendary swordsman, I will talk to him personally." "Brother Gong Sun, this..." Xian Zongfeng was stunned and looked embarrassed. He didn't expect Gong Sun Sheng to make such a decision. "I has already decided. There's no need to say more." Gong Sun Sheng waved his hand and interrupted Xian Zongfeng. He then looked at Third Lady Gong Sun and said, "Third Lady, you should get up now. Father, the Shura Sword Field is..." Third Lady Gong Sun was stunned. She looked very nervous, but before she could finish, she was interrupted by Niet Tian. Niet Tian stepped forward and helped Third Lady Gong Sun up. He smiled and said confidently, "Lady Gong Sun, you've helped me enough. If I can't even pass the Shura sword field, what right do I have to ask the Shinwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the evil edge sword competition? Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nye Tian and felt the confidence in his eyes. She wanted to say more, but she swallowed her words in the end. Gong Sunsheng looked at Nye Tian and said with disdain, "Kid, you're talking too much. Not everyone can pass the Shura sword field." The reason why Gong Sun Sheng dared to agree to Nye Tian's condition was because he was sure that Nye Tian couldn't pass the Shura sword field. A mere superior deity martial artist wanted to pass the Azura sword field? What a joke. Guiwu Quangsha's expression was very ugly and he was very worried. Although he knew that Nye Tian was strong and strange, the Shura sword field wasn't that easy to pass. Chapter 1933. The reason why Xian Zongfeng suggested for Nye Tian to participate in the Shura sword field was because he had already arranged everything. As long as Nye Tian entered the Shura sword field, it would be impossible for him to walk out alive. Nye Tian, I will give you 3 days to prepare. 3 days later, I will personally bring you to the Shura sword field. Gong Sun Sheng said cold as he looked at Nye Tian with a gloomy face. Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, "Lord Divine Sword, there's no need to go through so much trouble. Let's go to Shura sword field now." Now, Gong Sun Sheng was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled coldly and asked, "Have you thought it through?" Nye Tian, don't show off for a moment. Guiwu Quangsha also spoke, reminding Nye Tian not to be impulsive. The Shura sword field was not a joke. Nye Tian did not know much about the Shura sword field, but Guiwu Quangsha knew how dangerous it was. If Nye Tian could have 3 days to understand the Shura sword field, then his chances of passing would be relatively higher. Nye Tian suggested going to the Shura sword field directly, which made Guiwu Quangsha even more worried. "Lord Guiwu, please believe me." Nye Tian laughed, then said to Gong Sun Sheng, "Lord Divine Sword, I've thought it through. Let's go now." "Brother Gong Sun, since Nye Tian said so, we can't refuse. Let's bring him to the Shura sword field." Xian Zongfeng glanced at Nye Tian with a vicious look in his eyes, then looked at Gong Sun Sheng and said. Xian Zongfeng was already 100% sure that Nye Tian could not walk out of the Shura sword field alive, but the latter actually took the initiative to immediately participate in the Shura sword field, which was exactly what he wanted. "Brat, you could have lived for a few more days, but since you're in a hurry to die, don't blame me," Xian Zongfeng said coldly in his heart. "People from the Nye clan are really arrogant." Gong Sun Sheng smiled cold and said, "In that case, let's go to the Shura sword field now. I would like to see how a mere upper deity trash can pass the Shura sword field." Gong Sun Sheng felt that he had already made a big concession, but Nye Tian didn't appreciate it all. Therefore, if Nye Tian died in the Ashura sword field, Gong Sun Sheng couldn't blame him. Then, they went straight to the Shura sword field in the Shinwu city. The reason why the Azura sword field was named Azura was because once one stepped onto the sword field, it would be a battle of life and death. Neither side would win or lose. Only life and death would be decided. The initial purpose of the Shura grounds was to select talents for the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. The evil edge sword duel was held once every 30,000 years, which was too long. The Shinwu Sword Pagoda had to recruit new swordsmen during this period. In the beginning, the Shura sword field did not require a duel to the death, but they realized that there were too many swordsmen participating, so they changed the rules to a duel to the death. Anyone who stepped into the Shura sword field would either die or die. At first, the Shura sword field did not require a duel to the death. However, it was later discovered that there were too many swordsmen participating in the Shura sword field, so the rules were changed to a duel to the death. Most of the people who came to the Divine Martial City came for the Azura sword field. There were all kinds of swordsmen, young masters of influential families, desperados, lone swordsmen, and all kinds of people. But no matter who you were, once you stepped into the Shura sword field, you would be a Shura swordsman. Life and death would be decided by fate. The rules of the Shura sword field were simple. Winning 10 matches in a row would count as a pass. Once you passed, you could join the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. The rules of the Shura sword field were very simple. Winning 10 matches in a row would count as a pass. Once you passed, you could join the Shinwu Sword Pagoda. Gongsun Sheng and the others went to the VIP room backstage to avoid causing a commotion. The view was very wide, and they could see the entire Shura Sword Field. The Shura Sword Field was tens of thousands of meters wide, and it was an open-air field. Swordsmen could fight in the air. Right now, there were two swordsmen fighting to the death in the Shura Sword Field. Nie Tian's expression flickered the moment he sensed it with his divine sense. The two swordsmen were very strong. They were both early-stage paramount gods, and their cultivation had reached the level of selflessness. Are all the people who joined the Shura Sword Field this strong? Nie Tian thought with a frown. Are you scared? Gongsun Sheng sneered when he noticed the change in Nie Tian's expression. Do I look scared? Nie Tian smiled confidently. Gongsun Sheng's expression darkened, and he didn't say anything else. Xian Zongfeng glanced at Nie Tian and said, Brat, I'll let you be arrogant for now. You'll be crying later. Rumble. At this moment, in the sky above the Azura Sword Field, two terrifying sword shadows collided, causing the space to tremble. A powerful sword wave that was visible to the naked eye spread out, followed by a badly mutilated figure directly exploding into a bloody light in the air. The fight between the two swordsmen ended. The winner stood in the air with an excited smile on his face. This was the 10th fight, and the winner would be qualified to join the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. Then, a black-clothed judge appeared and announced that the winner had passed the test of the Shura Sword Field. The crowd roared like a tsunami. This was the first swordsman to pass the test in half a year, which was very rare. Meanwhile, in the VIP room, Gongsun Sheng glanced at Nie Tian cold and said, Kid from the Nie clan, you can go up now. Thanks for the reminder. Nie Tian smiled and stepped forward, ready to enter the Shura Sword Field. Kid, Gongsun Sheng's voice was heard again. Listen up, the Shura Sword Field is a place of life and death. Once you step in, there's no turning back. You either win 10 fights or die. I heard it very clearly. Thank you for the reminder, Divine Sword Master. Nie Tian smiled again, then looked up at Xian Zongfeng and saw a hint of slyness in the latter's eyes. Xian Zongfeng, you must have arranged everything in the Shura Sword Field. Nie Tian smiled cold and said, I just don't know how strong the people you've arranged are. The condition to join the Shura Sword Field was proposed by Xian Zongfeng, so Nie Tian guessed that Xian Zongfeng must have set a bloody trap for him, waiting for him to fall into it. However, Nie Tian was not afraid. He had been to places like the forbidden grounds of the 9 infants and the realm of darkness. The Shura Sword Field could not scare him. Nie Tian, you must be careful. Guewu Kuangsha looked worried and called out to Nie Tian. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Nie Tian smiled faintly, then moved and came to the Shura Sword Field. Nie Tian's appearance caused the quiet spectator stand to boil up again. In the past, after a Shura battle, it would take a long time for the next challenger to appear. No one expected a new challenger to appear so soon. However, when everyone's gazes were focused on Nie Tian, a burst of ridiculing and disdainful laughter burst out. Chapter 1934. Nie Tian stood on the Azura Sword Field, causing the crowd to roar with laughter. F***CK. Am I seeing things? This kid only has the strength of a high god. With such trash strength, is this kid here to be a joke? F***CK his grandma. This silver hair is really a high god trash. Did he come to the wrong place? Huh. A high god ant appearing in the Azura Sword Field is an insult to the Azura Sword Field. If this kid isn't killed in one move, I'm willing to cut off my head and let you guys kick it like a ball. God knows how many over-god martialists have died in the Azura Sword Field. This high god trash is either an idiot or a lunatic. Nie Tian stood on the sword field and heard everyone's words clearly. However, his expression didn't change at all, and he looked completely unperturbed. After experiencing so much, he did not care what others thought of him. You can look down on me or worship me. I, Nie Tian, am still Nie Tian. Nothing will change. This little brother is indeed a young talent. At such a young age, you are already at the peak of the high god realm. At this moment, the black-clothed referee in the sky spoke. He sneered and said, What's more frightening is that this little brother's cultivation in swordsmanship has reached the realm of selflessness. It's really rare. The black-clothed referee's words were obviously praising Nyetian. However, no matter how one listened to it, it was not pleasing to the ear. It made people feel weird and uncomfortable. Nyetian suddenly raised his head to look at the black-clothed referee and said cold, "Let's begin." The black-clothed referee's eyes narrowed, and his expression turned extremely ugly. He fiercely said 2 words, "Begin." "Ha ha! Let me kill this genius swordsman. A high god trash dares to step into the Azura sword field? He's courting death." As soon as the black-clothed referee's voice fell, a violent figure dashed out and landed heavily on the Azura sword field. A pair of cold eyes stared at Nyetian and said, "Brat, don't worry. I'll give you a quick death. I'll kill you in 1 move. Slaughter this arrogant brat." The appearance of the burly swordsman immediately caused everyone to cry out in alarm. Everyone's gazes became dark and ruthless, anxiously wanting to see the scene of Nyetian being insta-killed. Everyone was certain that Nyetian would be instantly killed by the burly swordsman in front of them without any suspense. Nyetian looked at the burly swordsman, and his lips twitched slightly. He said indifferently, "The strength of a mid-over-god and the essence of the sword. I really don't understand where you get the courage to stand in the Azura sword field with your strength." After saying that, Nyetian's eyes were full of contempt. An opponent like this was beneath his notice. Nyetian didn't even have the desire to draw his sword, let alone use the 3 great forbidden skills. "Smelly brat, are you looking down on me?" The burly swordsman's face was gloomy, and his eyes were as cold as ice, filled with cold, killing intent. One could imagine how angry he was at being mocked by a piece of high god trash. "Make your move," Nyetian said indifferently, not bothering to waste any more time. "You're looking to die." The burly swordsman roared out. With a movement of his body, a black heavy sword appeared in his hand. He leapt up and wielded the sword with both hands, swinging it viciously at Nyetian. Bang! In the next moment, there was a muffled sound in the air, and a figure was sent flying. The figure suddenly trembled mid-air, directly exploding into a bloody mist. Everyone's eyes suddenly trembled. When they looked over, there was only one figure left, standing in the Azura sword field. It was Nyetian. The burly swordsman had actually been killed by Nyetian in a single move. He was unable to fight back at all, and he did not even have the time to cry out. In the blink of an eye, the Azura sword field became deathly silent. Countless gazes were fixed on Nyetian, and the shock on their faces could not be any greater. The crowd finally reacted quite a while later, and all sorts of strange cries rang out. How is this possible? Are my eyes playing tricks on me? Why didn't I see him draw his sword? That silver-haired kid didn't draw his sword at all. He used sword intent to kill his opponent instantly. Instant kill with sword intent? That's impossible. That's impossible. That kid is only a greater god, so it's impossible for him to kill a mid-over-god swordsman instantly with sword intent alone. Everyone was shocked. They could not believe what they had just seen. Gongsun Xingji's face sank in the VIP lounge. His huge body trembled slightly as terrifying flames of fury surged in his eyes. Clearly, he was shocked by what he had just seen as well. He had never seen Nyetian fight before, so he did not have a full understanding of Nyetian's strength. He only knew that Nyetian's martial body was unimaginably tough, but he had never thought that Nyetian's sword intent would be so powerful as well. An expert like Gongsun Xingji could obviously see how Nyetian had killed his opponent. He had indeed not drawn his sword. He had killed his opponent instantly with sword intent alone. This kid's sword intent is so strange. It seems to contain several types of energy that can fuse perfectly. His sword intent is so powerful that it's unparalleled among swordsmen of the same level. Gongsun Xingji was shocked. He said, "This kid isn't too powerful right now. Once he matures, he'll definitely become an extremely terrifying swordsman." He even felt that Nie Tion's sword intent was even more powerful than some swordsmen who had fused their sword into one. It was truly terrifying. Xian Zongfeng's expression was not too good either. He could sense that Nie Tion's strength had increased by quite a lot. He thought to himself, this brat is too terrifying. When he first came to the divine martial city, he was only a late greater god, and his way of the sword was only its sword essence. Now, in just 10 days, not only has his strength increased to the peak of greater god, even his way of the sword has reached the realm of selflessness. This speed of improvement is truly terrifying. Xian Zongfeng thought to himself. His face turned incomparably cold. His eyes were surging with chilling, killing intent. As a swordsman, he certainly understood how difficult it was to improve one's way of the sword. Nie Tion's speed of improvement was far beyond his expectations. Little did he know that the reason why Nie Tion could improve his way of the sword was thanks to his blood-sobbing nascent soul. If the demonic fiend god's energy did not devour the blood-sobbing nascent soul, Nie Tion's way of the sword would not have improved so quickly. Xian Zongfeng was the one to thank for Nie Tion's terrifying strength. The other person in the VIP lounge, Third Lady Gong's son, was also horrified. She obviously did not expect Nie Tion to be this terrifying. But Guiwu Quangsha, Jian Jingyun, and Guiwu did not look optimistic. On the contrary, they were even more worried. They knew Nie Tion's strength. Therefore, they were not surprised by Nie Tion's performance at all. On the contrary, they were very worried. Nie Tion exposing his strength so early would undoubtedly make his opponents more cautious. This would be extremely disadvantageous to him in the following battles. Guiwu Quangsha had been secretly observing Xian Zongfeng. He could feel the killing intent in the latter's eyes. He guessed that Xian Zongfeng had most likely arranged a very terrifying opponent for Nie Tion. Chapter 1935. Countless gazes gathered on Nie Tion in the Azura sword field. Their eyes trembled in shock. Only now did everyone realize that the silver-haired cultivator before them was much more terrifying than they had imagined him to be. Nie Tion abruptly raised his head, swept his gaze across the crowd, and said coldly, "Who's next?" Everyone's eyes trembled when they heard his deep, cold voice. They actually felt fear. How arrogant! At this moment, a bellow rang out. Afterwards, a figure descended from the sky and landed before Nie Tion. He stared at Nie Tion calmly and growled, "Do you really think you're invincible just because you killed a piece of trash who's only a mid-over god?" Nie Tion's eyes narrowed slightly. He stared at the person before him, and he could not help but smile coldly. His gaze was filled with disdain. The person was as skinny as a stick. He seemed like a skeleton as he stood there. He was a late over god, and had comprehended the essence of the sword. This strength was indeed much stronger than that of the previous martial artist. However, in front of Nie Tion, it was still trash. "I've never believed I'm invincible, but I'm more than enough to kill you." Nie Tion glanced at the skinny man coldly and said with a venomous gaze. He really couldn't understand why these people with mediocre strength would be so arrogant and rush to their deaths. "Brat, you're far too arrogant," the skinny man sneered. The lean man smiled coldly. He flipped his palm that was like a withered branch, and a slender sword appeared in his hand. The sword light was actually glowing with a dark green color, which looked extremely strange. "Poison." Nie Tion glanced at it, and his lips curled up slightly. He could immediately tell that the person's sword actually contained poison. "Brat, countless swordsmen have died to my jade water poison blade. You'll be next." An evil light flickered in the skinny man's eyes. His killing intent was extremely heavy. This person's sword spirit is actually poisonous. That brat's in danger. He'll definitely die from the sword chi. Yeah, the sword chi contains poison. It's not something that regular swordsmen can defend against. Although the silver-haired brat is arrogant, his talent is definitely not for show. It would be a pity if he were to die like this. Pity my ass. He's not strong enough, yet he still wants to challenge the Azura sword field. He's courting death, so he can't blame anyone else. The crowd discussed among themselves as they stared at Nie Tion and the skinny swordsman, looking forward to the moment when the two would clash. Stinking brat, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? The lean man looked at Nye Tian with a murderous look and provoked him. Are you sure you want me to make the first move? Nye Tian faintly smiled. Grandpa sees that you're from a younger generation, so I'll let you make the first move. Hurry up. The lean man laughed coldly, extremely insolent. Idiot. Nye Tian's lips twitched as his body quivered. Instantly, a ray of sword will shot out like the wind and lightning, fast to the extreme. Pooh! Just as he finished speaking, there was the sound of flesh being torn apart in the air. Before the lean man could react, his head flew into the air. His mouth was wide open, but no sound came out. Nye Tian's lips curled into a cold smile as he said coldly, "This is the price for letting me make the first move." The lean man was really looking for trouble with his life. If he let Nye Tian make the first move, he wouldn't even have the chance to make a move. The swordsman who was killed by Nye Tian in an instant had at least made a move, but this lean man died before he could even make a move. The bloody scene caused the entire Azura sword field to fall into dead silence once again. Countless eyes were trembling with horror. They couldn't believe the scene in front of them. Nye Tian's strength was far beyond their expectations. After a long time, countless gasps were heard, followed by exclamations. What a fast sword will! How can this kid's sword will be so fast? If Nye Tian relied on the power of his sword to kill his opponent in an instant in the first round, then in the second round, he relied on the speed of his sword will. It was because the speed was so fast that the lean man didn't even have time to react and died a horrible death. The lean man's Yuan Ling sword was highly toxic, and both his sword chi and sword were highly toxic. If he had made a move, it might have even forced Nye Tian to use his sword. Once again, Nye Tian killed his opponent in an instant without even using his sword. In the VIP room, Gong Sun Sheng's huge body was trembling nonstop. His eyes were extremely strange, and he couldn't believe what had happened. Brother Gong Sun, are you okay? Xian Zongfeng's reaction was very calm as he looked at Gong Sun Sheng and asked with concern. I'm fine. Gong Sun Sheng waved his hand and murmured, the Nye Kid sword is so terrifying. Not only is it powerful, but it's also very fast. I'm afraid no swordsman at the same level can have a stronger sword will than him. Third Lady Gong Sun listened and couldn't help but nod. She was also a swordsman and had reached the intermediate level of sword and martial arts as one. Of course, she could see how terrifying Nye Tian's sword will was. Brother Gong Sun, Nye Tian's strength is far more than this. Xian Zongfeng let out a strange laugh and said, when Nye Tian first came to the Shenwu city, the three devils of the North Sea provoked the Shenwu Sword Pagoda and attacked Wui. Wui wasn't a match for the three fierce ones of the North Sea, so it was Nye Tian who killed the second of the three fierce ones, Yang Lin, with a single sword strike. How is this possible? Gong Sun Sheng was taken aback. He gasped in shock and let out a strange cry. The three devils of the North Sea were famous swordsmen. Although they were far from peak swordsmen, they were still very powerful. According to Xian Zongfeng, Lian Wui was defeated by the three devils, and then Nye Tian appeared and killed one of the three devils, Yang Lin, in one move. If that was the case, then Nye Tian's strength was too monstrous. He was much stronger than Lian Wui. This news was so shocking that Gong Sun Sheng couldn't accept it. Lian Wui was the top genius of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, and Gong Sun Sheng knew her strength very well. What Xian Zongfeng said was the truth, but he deliberately exaggerated Nye Tian's strength to increase Gong Sun Sheng's fear of Nye Tian. Sir Master Wu, Nye Tian killed Yang Lin because the latter was injured by Miss Lian Wui and he underestimated her. That battle was not Nye Tian's true strength. Gui Wu Kuang Sha stepped forward to explain. He was afraid that Gong Sun Sheng was too afraid of Nye Tian and had other ideas. Gong Sun Sheng's expression was very ugly. No matter how Gui Wu Kuang Sha explained, he could tell that Nye Tian's strength was way beyond his expectations. If Nye Tian was weak, how would he dare to fight against the three devils of the North Sea? However, Gong Sun Sheng couldn't understand why Nye Tian was so powerful. Xian Zongfeng saw Gong Sun Sheng's reaction and said coldly, Gong Sun Sheng, you should know by now that Nie Tian is a big threat. He can't be left alive. Chapter 1936. In the Azura sword field, Nie Tian once again used his sword intent to kill his opponent, which caused the atmosphere in the Azura sword field to become oppressive. Everyone's gaze towards him changed, from the previous ridicule and contempt to shock and fear. Nie Tian's strength was too strong, too strange, making everyone feel that it was inconceivable. Nie Tian was indeed arrogant, but he had the capital to be arrogant. Who's next? Nie Tian raised his head again, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, and spoke coldly, revealing a cold, killing intent, making people shudder. Let me. Just as he finished speaking, a stern voice sounded, and then a thin figure appeared, landing in front of Nie Tian like a ghost, staring at Nie Tian with a sinister gaze, and said, Stinking brat, let me experience your sword intent. Nie Tian looked at the opponent in front of him, and his gaze couldn't help but freeze. This person's stature was very short, only the stature of a 10-year-old child, not much taller than Sakura, but his appearance was shriveled and skinny, looking like an old man. Moreover, his ears were also pointed like a bat's. Nie Tian sensed for a moment this guy wasn't of any other race, but 100% human. He probably cultivated some evil arts to make his appearance like this. The appearance of this person caused a discussion in the spectator stands. Damn, what kind of monster is this? How did he grow like this? And he still dares to run out and scare people. Too much. Don't talk nonsense. He's the poison bat of the Thousand Evil sect. Can you afford to provoke him? The poison bat of the Thousand Evil sect is really evil. I heard that this guy likes to skin people alive. I wonder if it's true. Of course it's true. It said that the poison bat can absorb blood chi and sword intent from other swordsmen. He skinned people alive to expose blood chi, and at the same time, not letting it leak out for him to absorb. When Nie Tian heard the discussion of the crowd, he couldn't help but smile. It turned out that this guy, with a strange figure, was actually a famous figure. The Thousand Evil sect, this force was no stranger to Nie Tian. One of the 3 evils of the North Sea he killed was from the Thousand Evil sect. This strange poison bat in front of him was actually from the Thousand Evil sect. Nie Tian's divine sense swept over the poison bat, and he found that the latter's strength was at the peak of the Lord God realm, a swordsman in the realm of selflessness. This strength was the same as Jian Jingyun and Gue Wutsan, far more terrifying than the previous 2 swordsmen. Unfortunately, it was still unable to withstand a single blow from Nie Tian. Nie Tian looked at Poison Bat and smiled coldly. You do look like a bat, Poison Bat from the Myriad Evil sect. Poison Bat of the sect. The corner of Poisonous Bat's mouth twitched as he licked his lips. His eyes were bloodthirsty and fierce as he said, Little bastard, do you think you're so powerful just because you killed 2 small fries? God, you Tian I sect, Saint Realm, Evil Field, I will skin you, pull out your tendons, and slowly absorb your blood, chi, and sword intent. This is the first time I have enjoyed such a fresh swordsman. Nie Tian shook his head slightly, sneered, and said disdainfully, Poison Bat, you are right, the 2 people I just killed were indeed small fries. But you are no exception. You will soon become the 3rd small fries I kill. Arrogant. Poison Bat felt the disdain in Nie Tian's eyes. He could not help but let out a strange cry, and roared, Brat, don't look down on your master, Poison Bat. Your end will definitely be miserable. As soon as he finished speaking, Poison Bat's body flickered, and then he turned into a shadow, directly disappearing from where he stood. Hey, where's Poison Bat? Seeing this scene, everyone cried out, not knowing what had happened. It was hard to imagine that Poison Bat actually disappeared in front of everyone. Nie Tian stood in the same place, with a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes were very calm. Of course, he knew that Poison Bat did not disappear, but used a speed that surpassed the human eye to hide. It had to be said that Poison Bat's speed was indeed very fast, and it was difficult for ordinary people to find him. But unfortunately, Nyetian was a person who had the holographic divine rune, and he also had the starry sky eyes, so he knew everything within tens of thousands of meters of the Azura sword field like the back of his hand. It was simply a joke for Poison Bat to want to hide under his nose. Nyetian stood motionless, and his divine sense had already firmly locked on Poison Bat. The latter's every move had been seen by him. "Little bastard, die." At this moment, there was a strange cry in the void, and then 4 figures appeared in the air. All of them were poison bats, and they attacked Nyetian from 4 different directions. Poison Bat condensed 3 doppelgangers, and together with his original body, they attacked at the same time, and all of them were sneak attacks, which made it impossible for Nyetian to avoid. "It's over, that kid is dead." When the crowd saw this, their eyes trembled violently, as if they could already see the scene of Nyetian being torn apart by the poison bat. But at this moment, Nyetian stood in the same place with a very calm expression. There was no change on his face, and there was no fear at all. Boom, 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 boom. The 4 poison bats attacked at the same time, and 4 sharp sword shadows attacked Nyetian. They had the same aura and the same sword light, making it impossible to tell which was the real one. However, Nyetian was as steady as a mountain, and he murmured, "The strength of a peak over God, and the realm of selflessness of the sword. You are qualified for me to use my sword." With that, Nyetian's starlight heavenly slash appeared in his hand, and at the same time, a star soul flame appeared in his palm, directly fusing with the blade. Star flow devours the sky. In the next moment, Nyetian stabbed out without hesitation, and the surging sword shadows attacked one of the poison bats. The sword intent was wild, and the killing intent was heavy. Rumble. Bang. The 2 swords collided, and the poison bat's sword shadows directly shattered. Afterwards, there was a dull sound, and the poison bat was thrown into the air, falling heavily to the ground. At the same time, the other 3 poison bats directly shattered, turning into sword intent and disappearing. How is this possible? How did you know where my main body is? I dash bang. The poison bat landed on the ground and stabilized himself. His entire body was red and bloodshot, and he opened his mouth with difficulty. However, before he could finish his sentence, his body trembled, and he directly exploded into a bloody mist. The bloody scene made everyone's faces tremble. Their expressions froze, and they could not make a sound for a long time. The poison bat was dead. He had been killed by a single strike from Nyetian. There was dead silence. Even though they had already been shocked twice, the 3rd time was an unprecedented shock. The poison bat was far more powerful than the previous 2, but he had still been killed by Nyetian. Moreover, he had died cleanly, and his death was extremely strange. Until his death, the poison bat did not understand how Nyetian could react so quickly, and how Nyetian could see where his main body was. Little did he know that his stealth movement technique was completely useless before Nyetian. The senses of Nyetian's soul had never left his main body. Chapter 1937. Nyetian killing Poison Bat with 1 strike caused the entire Shura sword field to explode. What just happened? Did I see it wrong? That silver-haired kid killed Poison Bat from the all-evil sect with 1 strike. Poison Bat is really dead, and he was killed by that kid with 1 strike. But what's going on? Poison Bat had launched a sneak attack in the dark, and had even condensed 3 identical clones. How did this kid see through all of this? Also, isn't his reaction a little too fast? Is that kid even human? He's a monster. The crowd discussed loudly, and the entire Shura sword field was boiling. When Nyetian entered the field, everyone looked at him with disdain, treating him like a clown. But now they knew that the real clown was themselves. Nyetian attacked again and again, killing his opponent again and again, refreshing everyone's understanding of him. This kind of shock was even greater than watching a battle between over-god experts. No one would have thought that a superior god could actually bring so much shock to the crowd. At the same time, in the VIP lounge, Gong Sun Sheng's old face was ashen and extremely gloomy. The stronger Nyetian's strength was, the more flustered he became. He even felt that if the fight continued, Nietian might really pass the Shura sword fields test. Although it was ridiculous for a superior god to pass the Shura sword fields test, Gongsun Sheng was really worried about it. Although the two swordsmen that Nietian killed were shocking, their strength was really trash. Poison Bat, on the other hand, had the strength of a peak over god and was in a state of selflessness. His martial arts and sword arts combined together could definitely fight an early superior god expert. But even as strong as Poison Bat was, he was still killed by Nietian with one strike. At this moment, Gongsun Sheng knew that Nietian not only had terrifying sword intent and speed, but his perception was also very terrifying. The reason why Nietian could kill Poison Bat was because of his superb perception. He had directly locked on a Poison Bat's body and killed him with one strike. "Kid from the Nye clan, you're indeed a monster," Gongsun Sheng said in his heart, the sharpness in his eyes intensifying. At this moment, Xian Zongfeng's face did not look good either. He sneered and thought, Nietian, your strength is really strange. Looks like you're hiding a lot of secrets. No wonder you were able to swallow the blood-weeping sword nascent soul without the aura of a sword nascent soul. Xian Zongfeng faintly felt that there might be an extremely powerful figure behind Nietian, which made him a little fearful. But then he thought that Nietian had died in the Shura sword field. It was an honorable death. Even if there was a big shot behind him, he would not be blamed on Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng thought too much. There was no big shot behind Nietian. If there was, it would be Fat Cat. Speaking of which, Fat Cat was indeed a big shot. In terms of knowledge, no one could be compared to Fat Cat. His only shortcoming was that he did not have any fighting strength. Besides Xian Zongfeng, Guiwu Guangsha and the others were also very shocked. Guiwu Guangsha originally thought that Nietian's biggest trump card was the Forbidden Rune. When Poison Bat appeared, he thought that Nietian would definitely use the Forbidden Rune. But who would have thought that Nietian did not even use the Forbidden Rune and killed Poison Bat with one strike? His fighting strength was so strong that it made people's hair stand on end. In this way, Guiwu Guangsha's confidence in Nietian had greatly increased. He believed that as long as the next opponent was not too strong, Nietian would be able to handle it. Just as Guiwu Guangsha and the others were pondering, in another VIP lounge, a pair of cold eyes were firmly staring at Nietian. The eyes were surging with a strange divine light. It was a man wearing a devil mask. His whole body was surging with green mist. He looked at Nietian, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. He actually laughed and murmured, "This is the person I want to kill. His strength is a little strange, but he is too weak. I don't have the desire to attack." Behind the devil mask stood a green-clothed woman. Her beautiful eyes flickered, and she said, "Lien Ru, this is the person that His Excellency wants to kill. You must not underestimate him. I always feel that he has a stronger trump card that he has yet to reveal." "LVing, are you doubting my ability?" Lien Ru laughed. Her gloomy eyes stared at Nietian and said disdainfully, "I, Lien Ru, am one of the dignified 13 reverse scale thorns. If I can't even kill a mere high god trash, wouldn't I be a laughing stock?" Reverse scale, Lien Ru revealed his identity. He and a woman named Lu Ying were assassins from reverse scale. Nietian had come into contact with reverse scale a long time ago. It was a very frightening organization. It was said that they specialized in stealing people's bloodline power. They were extremely evil. Net Above and Earth, Reverse Scale, and Thousand Feathers Pavilion were the three most secretive organizations in the 9 major realms. Nietian had dealings with all of them. It was surprising that an assassin from Reverse Scale would appear here. "Lien Ru, I advise you to be careful. This guy named Nietian is definitely not an ordinary warrior. I can sense a very frightening power in him." Lu Ying warned Lien Ru. "Don't scare yourself." Lien Ru wore a disdainful look. No matter how strange he is, he only has the strength of a high god. All he relied on was his cultivation in the sword Tao. "I'm a swordsman at the unity of sword and martial. and I also have the strength of an early-stage paramount god. Unless this kid is a swordsman at the legendary unity of sword and martial, I'll definitely kill him with one strike. Lien Ru was very arrogant, because he had the right to be so. He had carried out 108 assassination missions, and had never failed once. He had killed countless geniuses, many of whom were paramount gods. Therefore, he didn't care about a high god like Nietian. Lien Ru even felt that it would be an insult to his strength to kill Nietian. However, the assassination order came from a big shot, so Lien Ru had no right to refuse. He could only carry it out. Lu Ying looked at Lien Ru and frowned slightly. She couldn't help but shake her head. She didn't know why, but she had a bad feeling in her heart. The more she sensed Nietian's strength, the stronger the feeling became. Who's next? At this moment, Nietian's voice rang out in the Shura sword field again. His expression was calm, and his eyes carried a hint of provocation. He gave off an extremely arrogant feeling. Nietian's voice fell, but there was no response for a long time. After the previous 3 battles, people had realized how terrifying Nietian was, so they didn't dare to rashly enter the field again. A bunch of trash, let me do it. After a moment of dead silence, a voice that sounded like muffled thunder rang out in the Shura sword field. Immediately, a huge figure appeared and crashed into the Shura sword field. It was like a boulder falling to the ground, causing a huge wave of dirt to rise into the sky.